Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something heavy, real, and often swept under the rug. The grim, uncomfortable truth of what S3x and bodily autonomy looked like for women before modern times. You might think you're ready, but let's be honest, you probably won't survive this world if you're not a man, or if you think you'd have any control over your body. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and time down in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're watching from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not you anymore. You've been born into a small rural village sometime around the 1300s. Doesn't really matter where, because the rules are pretty similar across most of the world. Europe, Asia, Africa, the Americas. If you're a woman, your life is written before you can even speak. Let's say you're born into a peasant family. Your mother is exhausted. This is probably her 5th or 6th child, and maybe only 2 of them have survived past the age of 3. You're wrapped in a bit of old cloth, not because it's sentimental, but because that's all they have. Your father was hoping for a boy. He doesn't say it, but it's in his silence. A boy can work. A boy is a potential heir, labourer, and even a soldier if things go that way. You're a future bargaining chip. From the moment you take your first breath, the clock starts ticking on how long you have before you're considered marriageable. That's just a polite way of saying that someone, your father, uncle, or another male in charge, will trade you off, usually before you're 16, in exchange for livestock, land, political favour, or a small pouch of coins. Dowries aren't about your happiness. They're transactional. You're the transaction. Now imagine this. You're maybe 11 or 12, and your body starts changing. Your first period doesn't come with a celebration. It comes with secrecy. Your mother pulls you aside, hurried, serious, hands you a rag and mutters something about keeping quiet and staying clean. There are no sanitary products, of course. You fold up bits of cloth, try not to bleed through your dress, and you're told not to let the men in the house know. Period blood is seen as dirty, dangerous even. Some cultures at the time believe it spoils crops, causes illness, or even poisons wells. But here's the twist. The minute your body shows signs of fertility, you're not just a girl anymore. You're a vessel. Not a person with dreams or questions or feelings, just a potential womb. That's when the conversations start behind closed doors. Maybe it's your father speaking to a neighbour, or your older brother haggling with someone in town. They aren't talking about your likes, dislikes, or if you enjoy painting or climbing trees. They're talking about how many goats you're worth. Maybe it's 10 goats if you're from a decent family and you can bear children. If there's a rumour you might be infertile, half that. If your mother died young in childbirth, that lowers your value too. No one wants a woman who might break during delivery. One real historical twist. In some regions, like medieval England or feudal Japan, a girl could be married as young as 7, though the marriage wasn't usually consummated until puberty. Usually. But sometimes, it was. And there were no laws to stop it. Here's the thing. Love is not on the table. Romance novels are written centuries later, mostly by men who imagine damsels falling for their captors, or warriors sweeping women off their feet. But in real life, you're just trying to survive. You're told that marriage will protect you, but what that really means is that someone will legally own you and gain the right to your body whenever they want, and don't assume you'll have a choice in who that person is. Maybe he's 30 years older than you. Maybe he's a brute with missing teeth and a violent streak. Maybe he's a boy your age with no power of his own, just as scared as you. But your opinion won't matter either way, because the deal was made before you even knew what was being traded. Some communities had actual ceremonies where your virginity was proven with a blood-stained sheet after the wedding night. Let that sink in. If there was no blood, your husband might accuse you of deception. Women were sent back to their families beaten, even killed if the sheet wasn't satisfactory. Never mind that hymens don't work the way people thought they did, and still sometimes think they do. It gets darker. You know how in modern times we talk about bodily autonomy like it's a basic, right? That idea didn't exist, not even slightly. There was no concept of consent in the way we understand it now. Marital RPE wasn't just common, it wasn't considered RPE. The assumption was that once a man married you, your body belonged to him. Your discomfort, pain, or refusal were irrelevant. And remember, contraception. Nope, not officially. Women passed down herbal knowledge in whispers, things like pennyroyal or wild carrot seeds, but it was risky, and if caught, they could be accused of sorcery. so you could end up pregnant within weeks of marriage, even if your body isn't done growing. Imagine your hips and pelvis barely widened, and already a child is growing inside you. Here's a fringe fact. Some ancient cultures believed that female pleasure was a medical necessity, but only in weird, controlling ways. Ancient Greek doctors claimed that a woman's womb could wander around the body if she didn't have regular S3x, which sounds ridiculous, but it was taken seriously enough that women were pressured to marry and reproduce to keep their uterus in place. There's still so much more we could say about just this moment in your fictional life. You're maybe 13 now, married, scared, and silenced. There's no school, no space to dream. If you're lucky, you have a kind mother-in-law who shows you how to navigate things quietly. If you're not, you're alone in a locked house, with a husband you don't know, and a body that's not yours, and no one's coming to rescue you. Your wedding is a blur, not because you were swept off your feet or lost in love, but because no one bothered to explain anything to you. One day you're walking barefoot to the well, and the next, you're in a stiff, itchy dress, your hair braided by trembling hands, and older women are whispering things you don't understand. There's a goat being slaughtered in celebration somewhere outside, and your father won't meet your eyes. That's how you know the deal is done. Marriage for women like you isn't a milestone, it's a finality, a full stop. You cross a line and there's no going back. One life ends, another, more constrained, begins. Your husband, if you can call him that, is twice your age. He smells like sweat and hard work, and when he looks at you, it's not with tenderness, it's with entitlement. He's paid, after all. Maybe it wasn't goats. Maybe it was a plot of land, or a connection to someone with a little more influence in the next village over. The point is, you weren't the bride. You were the bonus. The first night is not romantic. No one gives you a pep talk about butterflies or nervous excitement. Instead, the women who dressed you offer quick warnings. Be quiet. Do what he says. Don't make him angry. Bleed, if you can. That's the proof. That's the performance. And afterward, when it's over, you lie there, sore and silent, while the proof of your virginity is examined like a signed receipt. If there's blood, you're safe, for now. If not, things get dangerous, fast. Some girls are returned, publicly shamed, or worse. There are stories of fathers stabbing daughters in the name of family honour, all because a bedsheet didn't match their expectations. You quickly learn that your body is less yours than it's ever been. It's a contract, not a home. And this isn't some niche, isolated tradition. This is the reality in households across empires and centuries. In medieval Europe, a girl's virginity was seen as part of the family's moral wealth. In parts of the Middle East, Africa and Asia, arranged marriages were, and often still are, seen as practical survival strategies. There are exceptions, of course, but exceptions don't stop patterns. Here's a strange little detail that gets glossed over in most history books. Bridal dowries often included more than livestock or coins. In some cultures, a bride came with items like heirloom knives or ancestral soil, meant to link her womb to the future of the husband's land. You were a vessel for legacy, a soil in which someone else's lineage could take root. And don't think money saves you. If you're lucky enough to be born noble, things don't improve. They just get more elaborate. In fact, your marriage is probably arranged while you're still in the cradle. You're a toddler in a lace bonnet and already promised to the third son of some duke you've never met. He'll claim you when you reach an age deemed appropriate by your father's agreement, and if that age happens to be 12 or 13, no one blinks. You might be paraded in a gown that weighs more than you do, your hair twisted into some fashionable misery, and your face painted white to look more pure. Everyone claps and sings as you're walked into a home full of strangers. But don't be fooled, you're still an acquisition. The jewels on your neck are part of the packaging. The fancy name you now carry, a brand. Legally speaking, once you're married, your identity evaporates. In most medieval legal systems, especially in Europe, you are now your husband's property. Not metaphorically, not romantically, legally. Under coverture, a married woman had no separate legal existence. She couldn't own property, she couldn't inherit, she couldn't testify in court. You become a silent extension of the man you now live under, and the expectation is crystal clear: produce children, preferably sons, quickly. If you can't, well, let's just say you might find yourself replaced, disgraced, or quietly locked away in some crumbling tower with only a maid and a prayer for company. But let's zoom back out. Most women aren't nobility. Most women, peasants, workers, villagers, are grinding away under even rougher conditions. You rise before dawn, you haul water, you cook, clean, sew, sweep, mend, birth, nurse, and try not to cry when it hurts, which is often. S3x isn't pleasure, it's routine, a duty, a risk. And here's a bitter little twist. While men had all the legal rights and none of the reproductive consequences, you had all of the consequences and zero rights. If your husband is unfaithful, it's just what men do. If you're unfaithful, or even suspected of it, you could be beaten, imprisoned, or executed. Adultery laws were almost entirely one-sided, and they weren't just moral judgments. They were about property and bloodlines. If you bore a child that wasn't your husband's, it could disrupt inheritance lines. That wasn't a baby. That was a political scandal. This is where things get even murkier. In many societies, the difference between marriage and slavery for women was basically paperwork. And sometimes, not even that. Enslaved women, of course, had even fewer choices. But even free women were bartered like livestock and given as gifts. You don't feel like a wife. You feel like part of a furniture set. Something bought, used, and passed down. And there's no recourse, no help, no social media to blow the whistle, no hotline. If you protest, you're dramatic. If you run, you're ruined. If you fight back, you're dangerous. There's no word for trauma, no framework for abuse. You just keep your head down and survive the day. Still, tucked away in corners of history, a few women whisper back. 1 in 10, maybe fewer, finds a way to use the system against itself, navigating alliances, learning to read, hiding herbs, forming quiet rebellions. But we'll get to them later. For now, you're 15, married, tired. You don't know what's happening inside your own body, but you're scared of the changes. No one teaches you. No one asks how you feel. Your husband expects you to smile when he reaches for you at night. Your mother-in-law expects you to give her a grandson, and all you want is to go back to the fields, to your sister, to the sky you used to stare at when you still felt like you belonged to yourself. But you don't. Not anymore. You quickly learn that your value isn't just in your obedience. It's in your body staying untouched by anyone else until your husband owns it, and once he does, in how many children you can produce. But there's a darker twist. All of this rests on one myth: virginity. A concept so loaded, so obsessed over, that it becomes the defining feature of your life, and the haunting ghost behind every sideways glance or whispered rumour. You've probably heard this one. A woman's virtue lies between her legs. It's repeated in different forms across cultures and time periods, but the message never changes. Your virginity is your ticket, or your trap, is what makes you marriageable, respectable, pure. But no one ever stops to explain what virginity actually is. Spoiler alert, medically, it's nonsense. There's no universal proof of virginity. The hymen, that thin bit of tissue everyone's obsessed with. It varies wildly in size, shape and elasticity, and it can wear away naturally or never tear at all. Some girls are born without one entirely, but none of that matters. What matters is the story, the blood-stained sheet, the performance. In many cultures, the morning after your wedding night is a public ritual. The sheet, or dress, or cloth is examined by elders, sometimes even paraded through town, to show everyone that your husband won a virgin. Some families keep that cloth for years like a twisted trophy. And if it's missing, if there's no proof, well, that means you're either impure, untrustworthy, or possibly the worst thing a woman can be in this world: experienced. Experience isn't empowering here, it's incriminating. A girl who knows anything about her own body is suspicious. Where did she learn that? Who taught her? What did she do? Even something as simple as confidence, eye contact, or a curious question can get you branded a harlot. And it doesn't stop at marriage. Even unmarried girls live under constant surveillance. Your behaviour, your posture, even your laughter can be dissected for signs of immodesty. If you're too shy, you're hiding something. Too friendly, you're inviting trouble. It's like you're walking a tightrope where either side drops straight into shame. And shame is currency. Entire communities run on it. Your family's reputation, your sister's futures, your cousin's prospects, all tied to whether you've kept yourself pure. So if anything happens, anything unwanted, anything non-consensual, anything forced, it's still your fault. Because virginity isn't about what you do. It's about what's been done to you, and whether or not it's visible. Here's a fringe fact. In some parts of Renaissance Italy, especially among the wealthier classes, young brides were sent to doctors or midwives before marriage to verify their virginity. These women, often poorly trained, often bribed, would examine the girl's body and issue a verdict, a yes or a no, a future or a disgrace. Some families even paid for reconstructive surgery if needed. Yes, medieval hymen reconstruction was a thing, using everything from fish bladders to animal tissue. That's how far they'd go to protect a myth. And in case you're wondering where religion stands on all this, it's not great. The major religious doctrines of the pre-modern world, while varied in practice, almost universally reinforced the idea that a woman's virtue equals her sexual inexperience. The Bible, the Quran, the Talmud, and countless Hindu texts all emphasize female chastity, virgin birth, or sexual sacrifice in one form or another, which meant that even if your husband was violent, cruel, or just repulsive, you were still expected to submit. That word gets repeated a lot in religious texts. Submit, obey, honour. It's less about love and more about hierarchy. Meanwhile, male virginity, not even a topic. Boys are encouraged to be curious, assertive, even adventurous. S3x is their rite of passage. For girls, it's their death sentence, or at least the death of freedom. Once it happens, they're marked. And if you're thinking, well, surely people didn't believe in all this equally across all societies. True. The level of obsession with virginity varied. In some indigenous cultures in the Americas and Africa, women's sexual experience was seen more neutrally, or even positively. But colonialism changed that. When European empires spread across the world, they brought not only their flags and diseases, but their sexual paranoia. Virginity became a global obsession, exported through religion, politics, and patriarchy. You'd think that by now, maybe you're 17, maybe older, you'd be able to relax a little. You've had children, you've done your duty, but the scrutiny doesn't end. Because now the stakes are even higher. You've gone from being a virgin to being a mother, and that's another kind of tightrope. You're expected to be modest, nurturing, obedient, and above all, faithful. Any rumour of adultery, even a lie, can destroy you. And here's the sick irony. Even if your husband is cheating on you with the barmaid, the widow, or someone's daughter, no one cares. That's normal. Expected even. Men have needs, they say. But if you look at another man, or if someone simply thinks you have, you're guilty. There are historical records of women being dragged into court based on anonymous tips or local gossip. Some were fined, others were imprisoned. In harsher regions, they were publicly flogged. In Islamic regions, under strict Sharia interpretation, 4 male witnesses were required to convict a woman of adultery, unless she was pregnant and unmarried. Then, her body was the evidence. Let that sit for a second. If you were raped and impregnated but unmarried, your pregnancy could be used as proof of your guilt. And no, the laws don't protect you. They're designed to protect bloodlines, not women. There's also a very uncomfortable scholarly debate still ongoing. How many of these virginity traditions were rooted in real medical ignorance, and how many were deliberate tools of control? Some argue that people genuinely didn't understand female anatomy. Others say it was never about medicine, it was about obedience. You don't need science to justify power, after all, just fear. Even today there are remnants of this in the language we use. Think about the words deflowered, ruined, spoiled. They all imply damage, loss, as if you've been robbed, as if something was taken from you, never to return. But who decided that? Why isn't it a beginning? Why is it always framed as an end? So here you are, young but worn down, still expected to keep your legs closed to the world, unless your husband commands otherwise. The only time your body is yours is when you're alone, in the dark, pretending it still belongs to the girl you used to be. You're pregnant now, maybe for the first time, maybe not. It's hard to keep count when your body's never been yours. You feel the weight in your belly and in your bones. There's no glow, no prenatal yoga, no cheerful doctor's visits or gender reveal cakes. Just back-breaking labour during the day, a constant ache at night, and an unshakable sense that every hour could be your last. This isn't a joyful announcement, it's a warning, a countdown. Pregnancy in the pre-modern world isn't a miracle, it's a gamble. You know the odds aren't in your favour. Maybe you've already seen other women bleed out in bed, screaming into rags while midwives prayed. Maybe your own mother died like that. You know too many women who never got up again, or who birthed babies that came out too blue, too small, or not breathing at all. But none of that matters to the people around you. You're expected to carry on, to keep your head down and your mouth shut. The baby is your duty. The man who put it there, he's already thinking about whether he wants a son. Maybe he'll acknowledge the child if it's a boy. If it's a girl, he might ignore her. Or worse, blame you for failing to deliver something useful. Because make no mistake, this isn't about life. It's about legacy. You're not a mother. You're a vessel, a flesh and blood incubator. And the rules are strict. Don't eat the wrong thing. Don't get too emotional. Don't think impure thoughts, or the baby might be cursed. That's right. There's a whole catalogue of medieval superstitions tying your behaviour to the future of your unborn child. If you looked at a fire too long, the baby might be born with red hair. If you stepped over a cat, it might have a crooked spine. If you were afraid during an eclipse, the child could come out deformed. And heaven forbid something goes wrong. A miscarriage isn't seen as a tragedy. It's suspicious. Did you lift something heavy, even though no one would let you rest? Did you take the wrong herbs, the ones your aunt warned you about? Did you sin, think lustful thoughts, talk back to your husband? Then maybe the miscarriage is your punishment. God's will. Or worse. Proof that you were trying to end the pregnancy on purpose. Which, let's be real, a lot of women were trying to do, quietly, desperately and without help. And who could blame them? With no pain medication, no understanding of infection, and no guarantee of surviving childbirth. Some women saw the only control they could possibly have was over whether or not to keep the pregnancy. There were methods, of course, hidden ones. Folk remedies passed between whispering midwives and trusted aunts. Mixtures of bitter herbs like pennyroyal, rue, or savin. Dangerous, uncertain, and often fatal. You had to weigh the risk of bleeding to death against the fear of delivering another child into a life of poverty or abuse. But it wasn't just physical. Your mind frays too. The fear builds in your chest until it feels like drowning. You can't sleep. You wake up sweating, heart racing, afraid you'll die in your sleep and the child inside you will die too. Or worse, what if you survive, but the baby doesn't? That loss in this world won't make anyone comfort you. They'll shake their heads, maybe mutter that you weren't strong enough, or that God had a plan. You try to prepare for the birth, but there's not much to do. There are no doctors for people like you. Only midwives, some experienced, some not. They've seen everything, heard every scream, cleaned every mess, but even they can only do so much. And here's the brutal truth. Childbirth was the leading cause of death for women for most of human history. That's not an exaggeration. In many regions before the 20th century, maternal mortality rates were staggering. In parts of Europe, 1 in 3 women died due to complications from childbirth. In others, infection from unwashed tools or hands led to death days after the baby was born. This wasn't considered an emergency. It was expected. A woman's life was the cost of reproduction. It was a risk baked into her existence. You weren't special. If you died, people might sigh and say, she served her purpose. The more elite you were, the more ceremonial and still terrifying this process became. Aristocratic women were often shut away for weeks before giving birth, confined to dark, hot chambers with thick curtains and no fresh air. It was supposed to be protective. In reality, it increased the risk of infection and suffocation. No one knew about hygiene, no one washed their hands, and no one would question a male physician's authority even if his tools were coated in the last woman's blood. Here's a creepy side note. In some cultures, like early modern France, men were actually banned from delivery rooms. Women gave birth surrounded only by other women, midwives, mothers, sisters, but that didn't make it any safer. In fact, it led to a kind of closed circle superstition. If you died in childbirth, it was blamed on curses, bad luck, or moral failure, not bad science. And then, of course, there were the babies, stillborns, breech births, twins where only one survived, babies with deformities blamed on sinful behaviour, or spirits, or the devil. The mother got the blame for everything. It didn't matter that no one knew about genetics or nutrition or prenatal care. You were the incubator, and if the output was flawed, you were faulty. Even if the birth went well, even if you lived and the baby lived, the job wasn't over. In fact, it had only begun. Breastfeeding, cleaning, holding, rocking through the night while your body still bled from the trauma. Postpartum depression, Not a thing. You're just tired. Weak, emotional, unfaithful even if you don't smile enough. If you act too strange, they might say you're possessed. You could be locked away, treated, or simply ignored until you waste away in your bed. And yet somehow you keep going. Because you have no choice. Because you love the child. Or because there's no one else. Or because if you stop, who will carry the bucket to the well? Who will nurse the baby at 2 a.m? You survive. Not because the world makes it easy, but because you're stubborn. Because something in you still whispers that maybe, just maybe, there could be more than this. But for now, your womb is empty again. Maybe it's healing. Maybe it's already preparing for the next round. You don't get time to wonder. You only get time to brace. Let's talk about something that didn't exist yet, but definitely should have. Consent. The concept. The word. The understanding that your body is your own, and that anything involving it should involve your yes. None of that was real for women in most of human history, especially not in marriage. Especially not when it came to S3x. You wake up next to a man who considers your body his rightful possession. He doesn't need to ask. He doesn't even think he should ask. To him, you're not a person who might be tired or afraid or in pain. You're a wife. And wives are expected to perform their duties. That phrase gets tossed around like a broom in a barn. You hear it from older women, from church sermons, from passing gossip in the market. A woman who doesn't keep her husband satisfied invites all kinds of consequences. What kind of consequences, you ask? Everything from beatings to abandonment to being dragged before local religious authorities and forced to publicly apologise for neglect. In some cultures, husbands could legally accuse their wives of denying them and have them punished. And no, you didn't get to explain why you didn't want to. No one cared. Pain, fear, or illness didn't count as excuses. Marital rap wasn't even a recognised term. It wasn't considered a crime because the law assumed that by marrying, you gave your body to your husband permanently, like handing over a set of keys. From that point on, whatever he did with it was between you and God, not you and the courts. Here's a real historical footnote to ruin your evening. The legal exemption for marital RPE persisted in many countries into the late 20th century, like 1970s, late. For centuries, it was written directly into law codes that a husband could not be prosecuted for ARPing his wife. Some versions even claimed it was a contradiction in terms, that such a thing literally could not happen, because a wife was not, legally speaking, a separate entity. And even worse, if you weren't married, you had even fewer protections. RPE wasn't always treated as a crime against the woman. It was a crime against her male guardian. Your father, your brother, your husband-to-be. Someone had damaged their property. You were just the vessel that got broken. Punishments for the perpetrator, if any, often came in the form of forced marriage. That's right. Some men could escape punishment by agreeing to marry the woman they assaulted. That way, her honour was restored, and the community could pretend nothing had happened. As if a wedding ring erased the trauma. As if tying yourself for life to your attacker was a solution. It wasn't just the law that failed you, it was the culture. You weren't supposed to complain. You weren't supposed to talk about it. In most communities, sex was something women endured, not something they enjoyed. If you expressed pain or dissatisfaction, you were labelled frigid, sick, or sinful. If you showed any pleasure, you were dangerous, maybe even demonic. There was no safe middle ground. And the fear? It was constant. If your husband was angry, drunk, or simply in a foul mood, you had no right to refuse him. Your body wasn't a boundary. It was an obligation. You could cry, go limp, stare at the wall, but it didn't matter. There was no language for what was happening to you and no one to listen even if there had been. Meanwhile, scholars, doctors and religious leaders wrote entire treatises about how to manage women. The general consensus: women were weak-willed, lustful, and in need of control. Their desires, if acknowledged at all, were considered animalistic and dangerous. So the answer was domination, structure, discipline. A woman who didn't submit was a threat to the divine order. One fringe theory from the ancient and medieval world claimed that women experience more pleasure from sex than men, which, ironically, was used to justify controlling them more strictly. The logic went, if women like it more, then they're more likely to be unfaithful, so better keep them locked down. You know, for their own good. Let's be clear, pleasure wasn't considered your right. You weren't supposed to know what your body was capable of, and if you discovered it on your own, that was a serious problem. Masturbation for women was considered not only sinful but medically dangerous. Some early physicians believed it caused hysteria, infertility, or moral decay. So even if you found a moment alone in the barn or the woods, even if you felt something other than fear in your own skin, you had to carry the guilt with you. And if you did speak up, if you said no, pushed back, showed fear or resistance, that's when the other side of the system revealed itself. Punishment. Physical violence was common. Beatings, burnings, humiliation. In some places, women who refused their duties were put in the stocks or publicly shamed. In others, they were sent to religious institutions for reform. The idea wasn't to listen, it was to correct, to beat the disobedience out of you. And then there was the psychological manipulation. You were told over and over that a good wife sacrifices, that her suffering is holy, that silence is strength. Women's bodies were expected to be passive, to absorb everything without complaint. You were compared to saints, martyrs, obedient animals, or silent stones. The fewer needs you expressed, the more virtuous you were. Of course, none of this was framed as abuse. It was dressed up in lace and vows and scripture. But deep down you knew. You knew every time you flinched when the door creaked open at night, every time you stared at the ceiling and waited for it to be over, every time you scrubbed yourself raw afterward, trying to erase the feeling. So let's not romanticize the past. Let's not talk about simpler times or traditional roles without acknowledging this part. The silence, the violation, the absence of choice. You might survive in this world, but not without losing pieces of yourself. You'd learn how to go still, how to separate mind from body, how to act like nothing happened. Because if you didn't, it would only get worse. You're not allowed to say no, and that's the most violent thing of all. So what if you don't want to be a wife? What if the thought of marriage makes your stomach turn and you'd rather spend your life reading, praying, or just alone? That question is dangerous, because in the world before modern times there are really only two paths for women: marriage or some variation of exile. And if you reject one, you'd better be ready for the other. Your best respectable option, if you're not interested in being sold off like a goat in a wedding dress, is a convent. Yep, a nunnery. That mysterious stone building at the edge of town filled with silent women in robes. Sounds peaceful, right? A place of reflection, prayer, maybe a little singing in Latin. But don't be fooled. It's not a safe haven. It's a different kind of prison. Some women chose the convent, genuinely. They wanted a life of the mind or spirit or escape. But many more were pushed into it by families who didn't know what else to do with them. Maybe you were too plain to marry. Maybe your dowry was too small. Maybe you showed too much curiosity or too much resistance. A stubborn daughter is a problem. But a nun? That's a solution. You're taken to the convent at 13, 14, maybe younger. Your hair is cut. Your clothes are replaced with a rough, simple robe. You take a new name, vow obedience, chastity, and poverty. And from that moment on, your body becomes church property. Literally. You are a bride of Christ, and that means no man can touch you, unless, of course, he has a key to the cloister and no fear of sinning in secret. Let's not pretend the convent is pure sanctuary. Yes, some were places of learning, literacy, and community. But they also operated under strict male authority. Priests and bishops controlled every detail, from your food rations to your sleeping arrangements. And if one of them decided to take advantage of his power, there was little you, or anyone else, could do. Stories of abuse behind cloistered walls aren't just whispered rumours, they're written into history. Inquisitors investigating heresy often uncovered misbehaviour in convents, meaning S3x exploitation, hidden pregnancies, and babies buried quietly in churchyards. If a nun was discovered pregnant, the man involved might be quietly relocated. The woman? She'd be punished. Publicly. Branded a heretic or seductress. And if you think Bride of Christ gave you autonomy, think again. Nuns were still subject to male governance. They couldn't leave without permission. They couldn't inherit wealth. And many convents were more like holding pens for inconvenient women, widows, disobedient daughters, or noble girls whose families needed a religious token for status. Here's a weird little historical quirk. In some places, families actually rented out their daughters to convents temporarily. It was cheaper than marriage and gave the illusion of piety. You'd live as a novice for a few years, then be brought back home and sold off properly once your family scraped together a better dowry. So much for divine calling. Of course, the convent wasn't the only supposed escape from the nightmare of forced marriage and motherhood. Some women tried to carve out independence through solitude, living as recluses, wise women, or spinsters. That last word became a slur, but originally it just meant someone who spun thread, a common trade for unmarried women. You'd find a quiet cottage, maybe near the woods, and survive on your own terms. But independence came at a price. If you weren't attached to a man or the church, you were suspicious. Alone, opinionated, or childless. Then surely you must be unnatural, dangerous. A witch, perhaps. You start to feel it in the way people look at you, the way their conversations die when you walk into a room, the way children are told not to go near your home. Maybe someone's cow gets sick. Maybe a child dies in the night. Suddenly you're the cause. Not because you did anything, but because you were there, alone, female. And that's when the real fear begins. Because if the town turns on you, there's nowhere to run. You don't own land. You don't have legal protection. You can be accused of anything, and if the right man agrees, that's all it takes. But back to the convents, because for a brief window in history, some of them did offer something rare. Literacy. You learn to read. You copy manuscripts. You study Latin, scripture, even a little science. If you're lucky, you're in a wealthy convent where the prioress protects her sisters and encourages learning. You might even write a poem, a letter, a thought that belongs to no one but you. But don't get too comfortable. Knowledge is dangerous. If you ask too many questions, you could be accused of pride, or worse, heresy. Women weren't meant to think too much. Just pray. Just serve. Even inside a convent, obedience was the highest virtue. And if your body betrays you, if you fall ill or age or simply break down from years of silence, there's no gentle retirement. You die in your cell. Maybe someone remembers your name, maybe not. Maybe a candle is lit, maybe nothing at all, and you were obedient, that was your legacy. This is the illusion of escape in a world that gives you two choices. Be owned by a man, or be owned by God. And if you step outside either line, the world will call you wicked. Will find ways to silence you, punish you, erase you. You want freedom? It doesn't exist yet. Not in any legal form, not in any widespread cultural movement. That's still centuries away. For now, you're a ghost walking corridors of stone, hiding in plain sight. You've avoided childbirth, maybe. You've avoided a violent husband, but you haven't escaped the system. You've just found another cell. The bars are just carved in Latin this time. You live quietly, obediently, cautiously, until someone points at you. Maybe it's the village drunk, the midwife's jealous cousin, a priest who caught you looking a little too directly at the altar. It doesn't really matter. All it takes is one accusation, one whisper that you're strange, unnatural, too smart, too old, too unmarried, too you. And just like that, you're a witch. Not the cackling, broom-riding cartoon version, not the sassy girl with cool powers from some modern Netflix show. No, this kind of witch is something far more dangerous and terrifyingly common. She's what society creates when a woman refuses to fit into the mould. And in a world obsessed with controlling women's bodies, any hint of independence is a threat. You've seen this happen before. Maybe you remember that older woman who lived alone by the river, who always knew when the cows were about to calve, or which herbs helped with fever. The men respected her, until they didn't. One sick baby, one crop failure, one storm too many, and suddenly she was the problem. Not nature, not chance. Her. And now it's your turn. You're dragged into the town square. People you've known your whole life, people you've helped, fed, even prayed beside, are suddenly looking at you with suspicion. You feel their eyes crawling over you, looking for proof. A mole here, a scar there, anything strange that can confirm their growing certainty. Because here's the thing, once someone decides you're guilty, they'll find a way to make it true. One woman says she saw you walking alone in the woods. Another claims her milk went sour after you looked at her cow. Someone else says their husband had a dream about a black cat. That's enough. The seeds of fear are planted. You deny it, of course. You plead, you weep, you swear on everything holy. But that doesn't work. In fact, it makes things worse. Because now you're hysterical. Why are you crying if you're innocent? Why are you so defensive? They start to test you. The infamous witch tests vary from place to place, but none of them end well. Maybe they prick your skin with needles, looking for spots that don't bleed, a so-called devil's mark. Maybe they tie your hands and feet, toss you into a river and wait to see if you float. If you do, you're a witch. If you drown, you're innocent. Congratulations. Some towns conduct full interrogations, torture sessions really. Your fingernails are torn out, your limbs are stretched, your feet are roasted over a fire, all in the name of confession. Because a woman in pain is easier to control. And if you break and say what they want to hear, yes, I flew at night, yes, I slept with demons, they nod solemnly. The system works. Another witch caught. And it's not just you. Other women start to fall too. Because once the fire starts, it spreads. Widows, midwives, herbalists, foreigners, beggars, anyone on the margins is a target. And so are the beautiful girls, the outspoken ones, even the wealthy women whose husbands are a little too eager to be rid of them. This is how communities cleanse themselves, by burning their own. You see, these witch hunts aren't really about magic. They're about fear, and they're about control. In times of war, famine, plague, when men feel powerless, they often turn to punishing women. It's a pattern that repeats again and again in history. In early modern Europe, between the 15th and 18th centuries, tens of thousands of people were executed for witchcraft, most of them women. In some villages, a third of the female population was wiped out, tortured, hanged, drowned, or burned. And while each case has its own story, the pattern is unmistakable. Women who step outside the lines are punished. Here's a particularly chilling fact. The infamous Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of Witches, was a best-selling witch-hunting manual written by two Dominican monks in 1487. It argued quite seriously that women are more likely to become witches because they are weaker in faith, more carnal, and insatiable in lust. According to this delightful book, a woman's body was not only suspicious, it was inherently evil. So when you're accused, you're not just fighting for your life, you're fighting against a system built entirely to erase you. There are debates among scholars about why the witch trials really happened. Some say it was mass hysteria, others argue it was economic. Confiscating the property of witches was profitable. Still others point to political chaos, religious reformations, the Black Death, or shifting power structures. But no matter the reason, one thing is constant. Women bore the brunt of it. Especially the ones who didn't, or couldn't, conform. Maybe you survive. Maybe someone powerful intervenes, or the hysteria burns itself out before reaching you. But you're marked now. Even if no rope ever touched your neck, your name is tarnished. You're watched more closely, talked about in corners. You might never marry. Or worse, you might be forced to, just to make the whispers go away. Or maybe you didn't escape. Maybe you're one of the ones who's tied to a stake, dressed in your own torn clothes, a wooden pyre stacked beneath your feet. You can smell the smoke before the flames start. You look out at the crowd, at the girls watching from behind their mothers' skirts, at the old men nodding like this is justice, and you realise you were never safe. You were tolerated until you weren't. Because in a world where women are only valuable when they're submissive, a woman with even a shred of power, real or imagined, is always a threat. And threats must be eliminated. So whether you're accused of brewing herbs, dancing under the moon, or just aging without a husband, the verdict is the same. Guilty. You were too visible, too loud, too alive. And in this time, that alone is enough to be condemned. You know what's fun? Being told that your body is broken, filthy, and in desperate need of healing, and then being told the cure is more sex. Specifically sex you don't want, with men who don't care if you want it. That's not sarcasm. That's the reality for countless women across centuries who were treated as both the disease and the medicine. You wake up one day in your 30s or even 20s and something's off. You're tired, depressed. Maybe you cry more easily. Maybe you're irritable, or your appetite vanishes. Today, we might call it trauma. Maybe postpartum depression. Maybe stress from living a life where you've never made a single meaningful decision for yourself. But back then, it's hysteria. Hysteria. The one-size-fits-all diagnosis for anything a woman might experience outside of a narrow, smiling norm. Sad? Hysterical. Angry? Hysterical. Sexual? Definitely hysterical. Disinterested in sex? Hysterical. Having opinions? Don't even get started. And the prescribed cure, according to centuries of physicians, most of whom had never even seen a naked woman who wasn't a corpse? Intercourse. Lots of it. With your husband, of course. Because obviously what every emotionally devastated woman needs is more unwanted penetration by a man who thinks crying is a personal attack. This isn't fringe theory. From ancient Greece all the way through the 19th century, medical texts claimed that the female body was prone to wandering womb syndrome, a belief that your uterus could literally roam around your body if it wasn't regularly satisfied. Symptoms of this ghost womb included headaches, anxiety, fainting spells, and just generally being too much. So what did doctors recommend? Marriage, sex, pregnancy, preferably in that order, but as long as you ended up under a man, you were on the mend. And if that didn't work, they'd try other treatments. Some would prescribe herbs or sedatives, others used internal massages. You can guess what that means. In fact, some historians argue that this is where the modern vibrator came from. Male doctors getting tired of manually calming their female patients during hysteria treatment. Medicine, but make it creepy. Imagine being told, again and again, that every part of your suffering is your fault, that your pain is because you're not doing your job, being a quiet, submissive wife, that your sadness would disappear if you just stopped resisting and let your husband fix you with his miraculous, toolkit. Now picture how that logic plays out in a marriage where there is no love, no safety, no choice. If you cry, it's because you need more sex. If you flinch, more proof of hysteria. If you resist, that's the hysteria fighting back. This isn't medicine, it's abuse with a Latin name. But it's not just doctors. Priests get in on it too. You go to confession, admit to feeling numb or angry or fearful, and they tell you the same thing. Submit. Trust your husband. Your suffering is holy. Bear it silently like the Virgin Mary. Pain becomes virtue, silence becomes strength. The men around you begin to speak about you like you're a broken object in need of repair. Not someone they've damaged. Not someone whose life has been stolen piece by piece. No, you're the problem. You're cold. You're frigid. Maybe you're barren or possessed. That last one, it gets you into real trouble. Because once people start thinking you're possessed, they call in the exorcists. Now you're kneeling in a dark room while holy water is splashed on your face, prayers shouted in your ears, and strangers demand that the demons speak. And maybe you scream. Not because you're possessed, but because you've finally been pushed past the limit of what your body and mind can take. But they don't hear a woman in pain. They hear a demon. Even if you're lucky enough to avoid an exorcism or a witch trial, the judgment sticks. You're now that woman. The one who makes people uncomfortable. The one who doesn't smile at the right times. The one who walks too fast, talks too little, laughs too loudly, or not at all. You try to find someone to talk to. Maybe your mother if she's still alive. Maybe a sister, but they're too busy carrying their own weight, or they've bought into the system themselves. You just have to get through it, they say. Be patient. Bear it. Don't bring shame. So you stop talking. You bury your feelings. You harden, slowly, like river stones smoothed over by years of water. And the tragedy is, no one even notices. Because to the outside world, that's improvement. That's healing. You get up, you do your chores, you survive. Here's a fringe fact to chew on while you scrub the floors. Some 17th century physicians believed that menstrual blood build-up caused hysteria, and the release of female fluids, during sex of course, was seen as the best way to balance the humours. Never mind that most of these men had no idea how a menstrual cycle worked. You're just a collection of tubes and curses to them. Meanwhile, the scholarly debate still rages today about whether historical hysteria was an excuse to dismiss female mental health or a genuine misdiagnosis. Honestly, it's both. Doctors weren't evil masterminds, but their ignorance was deadly. Women weren't treated as full humans with thoughts and needs. They were strange vessels to be managed, controlled, calmed down. And through all this, the one thing never addressed is the possibility that your suffering isn't internal. It's coming from outside, from the way you're treated, from the life you were forced into, from the trauma no one ever named. But they won't see that. Not for hundreds of years. Not until women begin to speak, to write, to fight for language that describes what's actually happening. Until then, you're just a diagnosis, a whisper, a problem. And the cure? More of what broke you in the first place. You learn early on. Don't talk about it. Not in the market, not at the well, not even in your own home unless the doors are shut and the wind is loud enough to cover your words. Because to speak of S3x, especially as a woman, isn't just scandalous, it's dangerous. There's a silence so deep it becomes its own kind of law. You feel it like a weight behind your ribs, a tightening every time you have a question you're not allowed to ask. What does it mean to be a wife? What is pleasure supposed to feel like? Is this normal? Does it always hurt? Why does no one prepare you? But those questions stick in your throat, because from the moment you hit puberty, you're taught one thing above all: good girls don't talk about that. You cover your chest with your shawl. You lower your eyes when men speak. You learn to smile politely at wedding jokes, even when you're terrified of what the wedding night actually means. Any curiosity is met with sharp correction, even if it comes from other women, maybe especially then. Mothers, sisters, aunts. They pass down not just rules, but silence. They've learned the price of speaking too freely. They've lived the consequences, so they keep their lips tight and tell you to do the same. And if you do break the code, if you say something too bold or are something too blunt, you're suddenly fast, filthy, difficult. Boys avoid you, or worse, target you. The village girls whisper behind your back. Grown women look at you like you're a fire that might spread, because no one wants to be near the girl who talks about what no one is supposed to name. This silence is more than cultural, it's institutional. The church doesn't just discourage sexual discussion, it actively punishes it. Women who speak openly about desire are labelled temptresses, Eve's daughters, corrupters of men. The moral failure isn't in being abused, but in being visible. The sin isn't the violation, it's the admission. You begin to understand that silence is your only protection. If you're hurt, keep quiet. If you're confused, figure it out alone. And if you dare to want something more, touch, intimacy, connection, you push that desire down so deep it starts to rot in your chest. In some places, even your body is hidden. The female form is so feared, so hypersexualized, that it becomes taboo just to exist in it. You learn how to wrap yourself, fold yourself, shrink into corners. You avoid bathing when others are around. You flinch when someone brushes past you, and all the while no one says why. You just know that everything about your body is shameful. Your skin, your hips, your voice, your scent. Menstruation is called the curse. Breasts are considered sinful unless they're feeding a child. And your own genitals? You don't even know the name for them. Not really. You've only heard euphemisms, half-jokes, whispered warnings. Here's something ridiculous and horrifying. In many languages, there simply weren't words for the female anatomy that weren't vulgar or clinical. No neutral, everyday vocabulary. No way to talk about your own body without sounding obscene or unnatural. Even medicine preferred vague terms like down there, and when you can't name something, you can't protect it. So of course you feel lost. So of course no one tells you how things work. The first time something happens, maybe your period, maybe your wedding night, you have no language, no framework, just instinct, fear, and a whole lot of guessing. And if it goes badly, if there's pain or bleeding or confusion, you assume it's your fault, because no one ever told you what was normal. Even among the women who do know something, knowledge is fragmented, passed down like smuggled letters, half torn, incomplete, whispered over soup or laundry. Older women might tell you to rub certain oils or avoid certain foods. Some of it helps, some of it is nonsense. Most of it just confirms what you already know. You're on your own. And let's talk about language for a second, because even that's rigged against you. The words for male desire, powerful, natural, even noble, but female desire, dirty, laughable, dangerous. The idea that a woman might want something, intimacy, pleasure, even just to be touched gently, is treated as either scandalous or pathetic. One historical oddity: in Victorian England, doctors considered female sexuality so mysterious and volatile that they began diagnosing nymphomania in women who had too many orgasms, or wanted them too often. What counted as too often? Sometimes more than once a month. That's it. More than once a month and suddenly you were mentally ill. And if you weren't interested in sex at all, that was a problem too. You were cold, or frigid, or simply defective. There was no version of female sexuality that wasn't pathologized. There's still an ongoing debate among historians about just how repressed women actually were during certain eras. Some argue that behind closed doors, women carved out their own spaces for discussion and knowledge, that diaries, letters, and hidden texts prove there was more awareness than we think. Others believe the silence was more complete, that it covered not just the surface, but the inner lives of women, suffocating them from the inside out. But whether spoken or unspoken, the impact is the same. You grow up disconnected from your own body. You don't trust it. You don't explore it. You fear it. And when something feels wrong, or worse, when something feels good, you don't know what to do with that. So you keep pretending. You act like the world taught you something useful. You smile when your husband touches you, even if it feels like being scraped raw. You nod when older women tell you it gets easier. You stay silent when your daughter starts asking questions, because you were taught silence, and now you're passing it on. Not because you want to, but because it's the only language you were ever taught. There's one person in the village who knows what's going on. She's not a priest or a doctor or anyone official. She's the midwife, the woman people both need and fear. She's been at more births than she can count, has seen death walk through the doors of cottages and palaces alike. She knows where to place her hands to turn a baby. She knows which teas ease pain, which roots bring on a late period, and which whispers calm a girl sobbing in the dark after her wedding night. But don't romanticize her too much. The midwife walks a thin, dangerous line. She is tolerated, but only just. Admired in daylight, distrusted at dusk. Because she holds knowledge no man understands, and that makes her powerful. And power, when it lives inside a woman, is always a liability. You might find yourself at her door one night, swollen with fear more than life. Maybe you've missed your period. Maybe you haven't stopped bleeding. Maybe the pain hasn't gone away since that last time your husband... Well, you don't have to finish the sentence. She just looks at you and nods. She gives you something bitter to drink. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. She tells you to lie still, tells you to breathe, tells you not to speak of it to anyone. Not because she's cruel, but because she knows what happens if people find out. You want to ask her questions. You want to understand. She knows so much, this woman, about bodies, about pain, about blood. She speaks in metaphors and half-truths, because even she has to be careful. Even she can't say what she knows too plainly. And in some places, she's more than a healer. She's the village's unofficial therapist, the secret keeper, the one who listens when no one else will. Women trust her because they have no one else to trust. Men tolerate her because they need her to keep their wives alive. But when things go wrong, she's the first one blamed. Child dies at birth? Must have been the midwife. Mother hemorrhages? Maybe she used the wrong herbs. A girl turns up no longer pregnant? Definitely the midwife. No trial, no proof, no understanding of infection or sepsis or congenital defects. Just tortures and suspicion, and centuries of fear boiling under the skin of every man who realizes he can't control this part of life. And the church? It hates her. Not openly, not always, but in doctrine and attitude. Because the midwife is the face of old knowledge, women's knowledge, pre-Christian knowledge. She uses charms and salves and superstitions older than the holy books. She performs miracles without asking permission. There are documented cases where midwives were forced to confess under torture, not for crimes of violence, but for helping women in ways the law refused to recognize. Abortion, contraception, herbal pain relief. Things women desperately needed. Things the system refused to provide. In many parts of Europe, especially during the peak of the witch-hunting centuries, being a midwife was essentially an accusation waiting to happen. Some women disguised their work under religious language. Others simply stayed quiet, avoided notice, practiced medicine in private. Because the wrong patient, the wrong rumour, the wrong night, any of it could end their lives. And yet the irony is sharp. Without her, women would die in greater numbers than they already do. She's the one who knows how to reposition a breached baby without breaking the mother's pelvis. She knows what herbs will stop a hemorrhage. She knows how to stitch a torn body with a thread and a prayer. She also knows when to lie, when to say the baby was born too early, when to say the girl was never pregnant, when to claim a child was stillborn, even when it wasn't. The ethics of survival are murky when the world is this cruel. She does what she has to do, so do you. Some women dream of becoming her, not because the life is glamorous, there's no glory in blood-soaked sheets and whispered confessions, but because it's one of the only paths to real knowledge, to agency. She moves through the village with a quiet kind of freedom. She has no husband, she answers to no man. She carries her tools in a satchel and her secrets in her eyes. But becoming her means accepting the risk, the loneliness, the suspicion. It means watching your friends marry and vanish behind doors you'll never enter. It means knowing too much and being trusted too little. And still, there's something about her. You see it in the way she touches people without fear, in the way she speaks plainly when others whisper, in the way she doesn't flinch at pain, doesn't hesitate in crisis. She's not just a healer, she's a witness. She's seen everything, and she still shows up. That's what makes her dangerous. Not the herbs, not the whispers, not the blood. It's the fact that she knows. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how much formal medical knowledge midwives really had. Some argue they were purely folk practitioners, guided by trial and error. Others claim they preserved critical information lost to male-dominated medicine. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. What's clear is that their role was both vital and vilified, essential to survival, and yet always suspect. You remember her long after you leave her house. You remember the way she placed her hand on your back without asking, the way she didn't flinch at your tears, the way she never judged you. In a world that expects women to suffer silently, her presence is almost radical. She doesn't save you, not entirely, but she shows you that there is knowledge out there, hidden in the margins. And sometimes, that's enough to get through another day. The first time it happens, you think you're dying. One moment you're just going about your chores, sweeping ash from the hearth, mending a torn sleeve, and the next there's heat rising between your legs, a wetness you didn't expect, and then blood. Bright, terrifying and final seeming. You freeze, you check again, it's real, you're bleeding. No one prepared you for this. No one told you it was coming. The silence around a woman's body doesn't just hide desire, it hides biology too. You think something's wrong, that maybe you're sick or cursed or being punished. It takes an hour to gather the courage to whisper to your mother. When you finally do, her face tightens, not with surprise, but with dread. She was waiting for this. She pulls you into the back room, away from the eyes of men. There, in the dim light, she gives you a folded scrap of old cloth. No explanations, no warmth. Just, "You're a woman now." A sentence that feels more like a warning than a celebration. She tells you to stay clean, keep it hidden, and for God's sake, don't let your father know. This is menstruation. Welcome to the monthly curse. The old women call it your moon. Others call it the devil's water, the red flower, the bad time. Every phrase is vague, loaded with shame, something to mutter and move past. You quickly learn to carry rags with you, always folded neatly under your apron. You learn to sit a certain way, to excuse yourself before the blood seeps through. Because if it stains your clothes, if someone sees, you'll be laughed at, whispered about, maybe even accused of witchcraft. In some places, you're told not to touch plants during your period. They'll wilt. In others, you're not allowed to bake bread or prepare pickles, because your presence is said to spoil fermentation. Cows might stop giving milk if you walk too close to them. Rain may follow you. Your blood is believed to be corrosive, even poisonous. And don't even think about going to church. In many religious traditions, menstruating women are considered spiritually unclean. You're told not to pray near sacred objects, not to take communion, not to enter certain parts of the temple. Some communities force women to sleep separately, eat from different dishes, or stay outside the home entirely for the duration of their period. A week of exile, every month. But it gets worse, because this natural, inevitable process also becomes a tool for social control. Your period is proof that your body is now useful, ripe for childbearing. It's the biological alarm bell that tells your family you're ready to be married off. The bleeding doesn't signal freedom or maturity. It signals that your countdown has started. You're not seen as a person with internal changes or emotional shifts. You're seen as an asset whose value just increased and might start declining soon. In the eyes of your community, your first period is the beginning of the end, of childhood, of privacy, of being left alone. There's something cruel about how the body betrays you. You didn't ask for this, you didn't want this, but here it is, every month, without fail, painful, messy, and utterly out of your control. You curl up on cold straw, holding your abdomen as it cramps and clenches. There are no heating pads, no ibuprofen, no understanding. If you complain too much, you're scolded. If you cry, you're being dramatic. It's just what women go through. Stop fussing. Here's a fun historical fact. Some early medical texts described menstrual blood as a dangerous substance the body needed to expel to keep women from going insane. Others believed that if a woman didn't menstruate, her blood would back up and cause hallucinations, madness. or even demonic possession. Meanwhile, a woman who bled too much might be seen as oversexed, which made her untrustworthy. In other words, there was no winning. And if your cycle doesn't follow the schedule everyone expects, that's a whole new problem. Miss a period, and people start to whisper, "Are you pregnant? Are you hiding something?" Get your timing wrong, and your life can change forever. Even if it's just stress or illness that made your period late, no one wants to hear the science. They want the story. They want a scandal. There's no space for curiosity here. No time to wonder what's actually happening inside your body. If you try to learn, try to ask, try to understand, you're met with silence or suspicion. If you talk about it too much, you might be accused of seducing someone. Because a woman who knows her cycle too well is clearly up to something. And the irony, men have no idea how any of this works. They're repulsed by the idea of menstruation. Some act like it's contagious. Others are fascinated in a dark, detached way, like boys poking a dead bird with a stick. They make jokes. They avoid eye contact. They demand sex, then complain when you say you're bleeding. Some accuse you of lying just to avoid them. You start to hide it so deeply that you forget it's natural. You dread it. You hate your body for doing this to you. You curse your own biology. You think of your period not as a rhythm of life, but as a monthly punishment. A reckoning. In some places, women respond with quiet rebellion. They pass down better cloths, safer herbs, gentler wisdom. They create tiny sanctuaries, unofficial red tents, secret sisterhoods. These spaces aren't official, and they're always vulnerable to being shut down. But they exist. Little pockets of truth buried inside centuries of shame. Modern scholars still debate the true extent of period stigma across different cultures. Some argue it's been exaggerated. Others say the shame is deeper than the records suggest, passed through glances and silences rather than laws. But one thing is clear. For most of history, a menstruating woman wasn't seen as powerful. She was seen as tainted. And that belief shaped everything. So you bleed quietly, you rinse your cloths in secret, you go to bed early to hide the pain, and when the cramps twist like vines in your belly, you press your fist to your stomach and grit your teeth. Because in this world there is no room for complaint. Just another price you pay for being born with a body they don't want to understand. You're 9 months pregnant and you've stopped sleeping. Not from excitement or dreams of baby names, but from fear. Cold, bone-deep, suffocating fear. Your back aches constantly, your legs swell, and every step feels like you're carrying a sack of stones. The baby kicks hard against your ribs, and your skin is stretched so tight it feels like it might split. But that's not the worst of it. The worst part is knowing what comes next. Labour. Not the birth scenes you see in movies now with clean sheets and heart monitors and epidurals. No, this is a candlelit room that smells of smoke, sweat, and old blood. The straw mattress is lumpy, the sheets are rough, and the air is thick with prayers and the kind of silence people hold when they're waiting to see if someone will survive. There is no doctor. There's a midwife, maybe the same one who helped your mother, your grandmother. She knows things, sure, but she has no formal training, no sterile gloves, no surgical tools, just calloused hands, sharp instincts, and maybe a bit of luck. Your contractions start in the middle of the night. You feel it first in your lower back, a slow tightening, then another, closer and sharper. You try not to panic, but you've seen what happens to women when things go wrong. The ones who bleed out, the ones who scream until their voices crack, the ones who deliver the baby only to die days later from fever and infection. The others try to reassure you. They boil water, bring cloths, whisper prayers, but behind their eyes is the same fear you feel, that this might be the end, that you might not survive the very thing your body was supposedly built to do. You lie back, knees drawn up, surrounded by women who've done this before, but nothing they say can prepare you. The pain is unlike anything you've known. Your body becomes a battlefield. Your mind retreats into the corners of itself. You scream, then bite your tongue to keep from screaming again. Hours pass, maybe a full day, maybe 2. The baby is stuck. The midwife tries everything. She pushes, pulls, shifts your hips, pours oil between your legs, begs the child to come. But nothing works. The pressure builds. You feel like you're being torn in two. You wonder if it would be easier to just die. Here's the cruel reality. Most pre-modern women didn't survive childbirth because the odds were never in their favour. There were no antibiotics for infection, no cesarean sections in any survivable form, no anesthesia, no blood transfusions. If the baby was breech, if the umbilical cord wrapped around its neck, if the placenta failed to deliver, there was nothing anyone could do. Sometimes, to save the baby, midwives had to make impossible choices. In some cases, if the baby had died inside you, they would attempt to remove it piece by piece, with their hands, without painkillers. Other times, they'd try to use forceps, crude metal instruments designed by men who never once had to endure what you're enduring. And if your pelvis was too small, if your body was too weak, you could labour for days, until your uterus ruptured, until you bled out, until you went quiet. One fringe historical fact. Some noble women were given opiates or even alcohol to dull the pain, but for most women, especially peasants, enslaved women, or anyone outside the wealthy elite, pain was seen as a necessary part of childbirth, a punishment for Eve's sin, a test of faith. Cry too much, and someone might say you lacked devotion. Even when everything went well, you weren't safe. Afterbirth could bring deadly infections known as childbed fever. No one understood germs yet. Hands moved from one birth to another, from livestock to your torn body without washing. Fever came fast and furious. Women who had just delivered were dead within days. There's a part of you that wants to scream at the sky. Why is this the design? Why must bringing life into the world come so close to ending your own? But no one asks that question out loud. It would be heresy, blasphemy, ungrateful. If you survive, and not all do, you lie there, shaking, blooded, and hollowed out. The baby is placed in your arms, tiny and fragile, blinking up at a world that has no idea what you just endured to bring them here. No one lets you rest. No one tells you it's okay to fall apart. Your work starts now. You're expected to breastfeed immediately, even if your nipples crack and bleed. Even if your milk doesn't come in for days. You're expected to smile, to love, to glow, despite the fact that your body is still hemorrhaging, your abdomen is swollen and sore, and your stitches burn with every shift of your legs. Postpartum depression doesn't exist in this vocabulary. If you're sad, you're melancholic. If you're angry, you're ungrateful. If you try to harm yourself or the baby, you're possessed. There is no room for recovery, no understanding of trauma, and if the baby dies, which statistically many do, you're handed a funeral instead of a crib and told to try again soon. As if your womb were a field that failed to grow crops, and the only option is to plough it again. Even the strongest among you can't escape the grief. You carry it in your bones. It changes how you stand, how you speak, how you trust your own body. There's an ongoing historical debate about how much agency women had in childbirth practices. Some evidence suggests that in certain communities, midwives and mothers had considerable authority, more than we think. But it's also clear that the broader medical and religious systems saw women as passive participants, vessels. The pain was part of the package, the fear was just natural. So you recover, as best you can. Maybe you survive this one, maybe the baby does too. You nurse in the dark, you hum lullabies, you try not to think about doing it all over again next year, because your value in the eyes of this world is still tied to what your body can produce, and no one cares what it costs you. You've survived childbirth. Maybe more than once, maybe many times. You've watched your body stretch and tear, watched it heal, or not heal, and gone back to work anyway. Because no one's giving you a break. No one's stepping in with a hot bath or an understanding arm around your shoulders. You're expected to recover fast, bounce back, be grateful. The baby lived. Then what's the problem? But you know better. You feel what it's taken from you. And if you're a noble woman, born into the ranks of royalty or aristocracy, then congratulations. You're not just expected to give birth. You're expected to build a dynasty, which means you'll be doing this a lot. Because noble women don't exist for themselves. They exist for bloodlines, for alliances, for power built on the backs of children, especially sons. If you're married into a royal family, you're not a wife in the modern sense, you're more like a government function. Your body is a treaty. Your uterus is national infrastructure. You're placed into a marriage contract before you even understand the word. At 10, you're engaged. By 13 or 14, the marriage is official. You're dressed in silk and jewels you can barely walk in. Your hair weighed down by metal pins, and everyone praises your beauty like it's a moral achievement. No one asks what you want. That question doesn't exist here. Your husband is probably decades older. He may already have mistresses, children, a whole separate life. You're a new pawn on the board. Your job? Produce heirs, male ones, quickly, and preferably without dying. You learn fast that a royal womb is public business. The court watches your belly. They track your cravings, your mood swings, how tightly your bodice fits. People whisper after dinner, is she pregnant? Is it a boy? Will it live? Every pregnancy is political. A son secures your status. A daughter? Disappointment. Or worse, suspicion. Did you anger God? Did you fail in your duties? There's an unspoken belief that good women bear boys. It's absurd, biologically meaningless, but that doesn't matter. In the court, perception is reality. And if you fail, if you miscarry or deliver stillborns or can't conceive at all, then things get dangerous. History is full of noble women discarded like spoiled meat because their bodies didn't produce what the throne demanded. Queens sent back to their families in disgrace. Others imprisoned, quietly poisoned, or replaced by a more fertile candidate. Henry VIII famously went through 6 wives, the first 2 of whom he blamed for not giving him a healthy male heir. He changed his religion, his entire country's religion, just to get out of one marriage and into another. That's the kind of pressure royal women lived under, and when childbirth goes well, you don't get to keep your child close. Sons are taken and raised by tutors and guards, groomed for leadership. You might be allowed to see them during formal visits, always under watch. Daughters stay with you longer, but only until they're old enough to be married off themselves, traded like currency in a marriage alliance somewhere far away. You don't raise children, you generate them, and don't think wealth saves you from pain. The fancy gowns, the gold-threaded tapestries, the feast tables groaning with food, they don't cushion the terror of labour. They don't fix a torn uterus or bring back a baby who won't breathe. They certainly don't protect you from the doctors, most of whom are male and clueless, experimenting with new tools and techniques on you, because where else would they learn? Here's a bleak little detail. In the 17th and 18th centuries, noble women were often subjected to forceps deliveries performed by untrained or ambitious surgeons who wanted to prove themselves. Some women bled to death. Others survived with lifelong injuries. But again, the baby mattered more. Always. If you can't produce an heir, the crown looks elsewhere. Maybe your husband takes a mistress, common, accepted, even celebrated. Courtiers flirt openly, children born out of wedlock walk the halls in plain sight. But if you stray, or if someone even hints that your child might not be your husband's, you're facing exile, scandal, sometimes execution. Women like Anne Boleyn were accused of adultery not because there was proof, but because it was convenient. A wife who fails to deliver a son becomes expendable, and you'd better believe people are willing to lie to make that happen. Still, some noble women fought back, quietly, cleverly. They used their positions to influence policy, build alliances, even manipulate succession. They hosted salons, ran estates, managed vast networks of correspondence. Catherine de' Medici ruled behind the scenes through 3 of her sons. Eleanor of Aquitaine managed to divorce a king and marry another, and became a queen twice. But those are exceptions. Most women in these roles were silenced. Others were praised posthumously only for their obedience, their chastity, or the sons they produced. Their letters were burned, their names forgotten, their bones buried beneath marble slabs that read Queen Consort like that's all they ever were. There's a scholarly debate about how much power royal women really had. Some argue they wielded immense soft power, through court culture, patronage and influence. Others say that their influence only lasted as long as their fertility. Once the heirs were born, their usefulness waned. What's not debated is the toll. Imagine giving birth 15 times in 20 years. Imagine burying half those children. Imagine smiling through the christenings and funerals, bleeding quietly behind palace walls. Imagine being remembered not for who you were, but for the lineage you continued. So you walk the marble halls in silk shoes, your head held high, your spine stiff with practice. You nod, you curtsy, you smile when they talk about your sons, and behind closed doors, you count the scars no one sees. Because royalty doesn't make you free, it just makes your cage prettier. There's a place on the edge of town where women go when they've run out of options. Sometimes they're sent, sometimes they arrive on their own, barefoot and shaking, with nothing but a bundle of clothes and whatever is left of their pride. It's a place people don't talk about too loudly, not in daylight. They call it a brothel, a house of ill repute, a den of sin. But what it really is? a last stop, a place where the rules of survival are different, and for many women it's the only place left. You might have imagined it as some kind of decadent escape, perfumed halls, women draped in lace, laughing over wine while men offer gold and flattery. That's the fantasy, the one sold in stories and paintings. The reality, it's dirtier, rougher, grimmer. The walls are thin, the sheets are seldom clean, and the air smells like sweat, smoke, and desperation. Most women here didn't choose this life. They were pushed into it. A girl from a poor family with too many mouths to feed, a widow with no husband, no property, no legal standing, a servant girl who was assaulted and then blamed for it, a runaway who couldn't find work, a wife discarded by a man who no longer found her useful. This is what happens to women with nowhere else to go. You're given a small room if you're lucky, a corner if you're not. You learn quickly how to smile when you don't want to, how to fake pleasure, how to pretend that this body, your body, is a product, not a person. You get used to the cold way men talk about you when they think you're not listening. Some men want you silent. Others want you to moan and act grateful. Some want to be cruel, to hit, bite, humiliate. You learn which ones are dangerous by the way they walk, the way their eyes don't blink enough. The madam might intervene if she thinks you're worth protecting, but more often than not you just deal with it. Every night is a gamble. Will the man be rough? Will he pay? Will he leave something behind? Disease, pregnancy, bruises that take days to fade. You keep herbs tucked under your mattress, wrapped in linen. You drink bitter teas that make you cramp and bleed, even if it means vomiting for hours. You do what you must to stay unpregnant, unclaimed, unruined, and yet society calls you the ruined one, the stained one, the fallen woman, as if you woke up one day and decided this was the path, as if you weren't pushed, tricked, sold, or simply left with no other way to survive. There's a twisted double standard at play here, one so old it's practically fossilized. Men come here freely, proudly. They joke about it with their friends. They slap coins on the table and demand your time like they're ordering meat from a butcher. And when they leave, they return to their lives untouched, their reputations intact. No shame, no judgment. But you're a whore, a harlot, a woman of the night. You lose your name, your family disowns you, the church denies you. And even if you someday manage to escape, even if you marry or move far away, that label follows you like a shadow. And here's the kicker. Sometimes this life pays better than anything else a woman can do. There are stories of women who bought their freedom this way, who became madams themselves, who climbed their way up from dirt to silk through sheer resilience. But those are rare. For every one of them, there are dozens who died in childbirth, from infection, from violence. Women who slipped out the back door one day and were never seen again. In many cities during the Middle Ages and early modern period, brothels were officially sanctioned, regulated, even taxed. Authorities knew they couldn't stop men from seeking them out, so they made money off the transaction instead. But the women? They were disposable, replaceable, controlled through fines, arrests, public shame. One historical fact that's hard to digest. In some regions, brothel workers were forced to wear specific colours or ribbons, marking them like animals. In Venice, they wore yellow scarves. In France, certain quarters were painted red so everyone knew what went on inside. That's where the phrase red light district comes from. And if you tried to leave, good luck. Many women were indentured, trapped by debts to the madam or landlord, paying off room and board with their bodies, never quite free. Others were blackmailed with the threat of exposure. Who would hire a woman once they knew where she'd been? Who would marry her? Still, sometimes small resistances bloom. The women look out for one another. They warn each other about violent clients. They hide girls who are too young, too scared. They share food, clothes, scraps of tenderness in a place that has no use for it. You make friends, even family among the women. You learn their stories, each one different and yet all rooted in the same betrayal. Society told them they had value once, when they were pretty, when they were untouched, when they were useful, and when they no longer fit the mould, society spit them out and called it justice. There's an ongoing academic debate about how much agency women had in the brothels of the past. Some argue that sex work in certain periods offered women more financial control than marriage or servitude ever could. Others say that's a romantic gloss on a brutal system, one that functioned through coercion, not choice. And the truth? As always, it's both. Some women found power here, others were destroyed. Most just survived, one night at a time. And you? You count your coins. You check your cloth for blood, for sickness, for signs of something worse. You sing softly when the building is quiet, songs from a childhood that feels like someone else's. You wrap your shawl tighter and try not to think about the girl you used to be. Because in this world, survival often means becoming something they never let you choose. You've made it this far without vanishing into childbirth, scandal, or the flames of a witch trial, but that doesn't mean you're safe. Because even when you do everything right, get married, stay modest, obey, you're still treated like a loaded weapon someone forgot to disarm. Your body is still a threat. So society invents something else to contain it. Chastity. And if obedience wasn't enough, now they want proof of permanent control. And let's talk about the chastity belt. Yeah, that thing. Maybe you've seen one in a museum. Cold iron, buckles, a medieval-looking torture device that screams, "This is why we can't have nice things." Whether or not they were used as widely as myths suggest is still debated, but the idea, that was very real. Lock up the body, prevent desire, protect purity. You're told this is about safety, about honour, about keeping men from taking what doesn't belong to them. But that's the joke, because nothing belongs to you. Not your body, not your choices, not your sexuality. The chastity belt isn't protection for you, it's protection from you. Because if anything goes wrong, if you get pregnant or even rumoured to be sexually active, you're the one who pays. So someone else gets the key. Your husband, your father, a guardian you didn't choose. The belt isn't just a symbol, it's a message. We don't trust you. We don't think you can be good on your own. You must be sealed like a jar. And sure, the physical belt might not be everywhere. Some scholars say they were more symbolic than practical, maybe even invented later and misattributed to the Middle Ages. But the idea of chastity being enforced, that's everywhere. You're raised with the constant reminder, virginity is value. Keep your legs closed, your voice soft, your eyes down. Don't tempt, don't flaunt, don't let your neckline slip, even by accident. And if a man stares too long, that's your fault too. Purity becomes the currency you carry from childhood. It's talked about like it's fragile glass, once broken, never repaired. A man can have a past. A man can have many pasts. But you get one shot. Slip up, and the entire world changes how it sees you. There are girls in your village, girls like you, who've made one mistake, or had no choice, who were cornered behind barns or lured with sweet words, only to be cast out when it was done. No one blames the men. The girls are the ones labelled unclean, temptresses, whores. Some are forced into brothels, others into marriages they never wanted, and a few, they vanish, taken away, silenced, all under the banner of chastity. It doesn't stop at marriage either. Once you're wed, you're still expected to remain pure in a different way. Faithful, modest, quiet. You don't get to explore your desires or even have desires. You're told that a good wife lies still, endures, serves. Sex is a duty, not a pleasure. The only acceptable form of female sexuality is one that benefits a man. And if you do enjoy it, if you hint that you want it, that's dangerous territory, people whisper. Maybe you're too experienced, too wild. Maybe you're not wife material after all. It's a lose-lose. Stay silent and you're a saint. Speak up and you're suspect. Here's a particularly bleak historical detail. In some households, fathers had the right to discipline their daughters physically if they were suspected of promiscuity. In others, young women were literally locked inside the home until they were married off. Their movements monitored, their letters censored, their friends vetted, all in the name of preserving virtue. You're reminded in 1,000 subtle and not so subtle ways that your body isn't yours. It's a piece of family property, a business investment, and the more tightly it's guarded, the higher the price. Sometimes it gets literal. In certain cultures and eras, your virginity is written into the marriage contract. If your husband discovers you weren't intact, he can annul the union, return you like defective merchandise. There are places where the wedding night includes a public display of proof, bloody sheets shown to neighbours, or held up to family members like a banner of triumph. And if there's no blood, you better have a good story. You might try to protect yourself to follow the rules, but the rules shift. They don't protect you, they trap you. One wrong step and suddenly you're spoiled goods. One rumour and you're damaged beyond repair. So what do? You become small, quiet, careful. You pull your shawl tighter. You keep your voice low. You avoid being alone with any man, because if something happens, even if it's done to you, it's still your reputation that shatters. There's a cruel, almost satirical side note to all of this. Some religious thinkers believe that the Virgin Mary remained physically intact after childbirth. Not only was she impregnated by divine will, she gave birth without even breaking her hymen. That's how obsessed they were with the concept of female purity. They rewrote biology to make it work. The scholarly debate still rages on how widespread chastity belts really were, whether they were used practically or just as metaphorical tools of fear. But honestly, it doesn't matter, because the fear was real. The control was real. The message that a woman's worth lived in her sexual cleanliness as was everywhere. And you? You live under that weight every day. You monitor how you sit, how you speak, how you walk, because at any moment your value could be stripped from you, just because someone thought you stepped out of line. Chastity isn't a virtue here. It's surveillance. It's submission. It's a cage with no key. And no matter how well you lock yourself in, someone will still try to blame you for the door being open. You think, maybe, once your husband dies, there will be peace, that you'll finally be able to breathe, stretch out your limbs, make choices without checking over your shoulder. Because widowhood, while wrapped in black and heavy with ritual, at least offers one gift. No one owns you anymore. No more wedding duties. No more sex on demand. No more childbirth roulette. Just silence, mourning, and, if you're lucky, a little space, but you forgot something. Freedom makes people nervous, especially when it's worn by a woman. As a widow, you've become something new, something society doesn't quite know what to do with. You're no longer useful as a breeder, but you're not safely buried either. You walk alone now. You speak without permission. You own property, maybe. And worst of all, you're experienced, which makes you dangerous. You learn this fast. One day, people are offering condolences. The next, they're watching you closely. Is she grieving enough? Is she crying too much? Why hasn't she remarried yet? Or worse, why is she smiling? You learn to walk a very narrow line. You dress in black as expected. You cover your hair. You lower your eyes. You mention your dead husband in every conversation. You pretend to still belong to him. Because if you look too alive, too vibrant, too ready to take up space, people start whispering. Some widows are stripped of everything. If your husband didn't leave you land or wealth, it could all go to his brother, or his son, or the church. You might be allowed to stay in your home, for a while, but you'll be a guest in someone else's house, a burden, a body that eats and takes up space without producing anything. And if you do inherit something, you're a target. Men circle like vultures, eager to marry you and absorb your property. You're approached by old friends of your husband, by distant cousins, by ambitious young men who smile too easily. They don't want you, they want what you have. And if you say no, they don't take it well, and sometimes they take it anyway. And the church, it has its own expectations. You're meant to remain chaste, devoted, a holy widow. There's even a term for it in some regions. Widow's chastity. The idea that a woman who's truly virtuous will never remarry. She'll dedicate herself to prayer, to charity, to fading quietly into the background, like a living ghost. Here's the grim joke. The older you get, the more invisible you become. But that doesn't mean you're safe. You're not just a widow, you're a woman without a leash. And in this world, that's suspicious. Historically, widows were often accused of poisoning their husbands, especially if the man died young or suddenly. Because how could a woman possibly want freedom without being wicked? If you cried too little, you were cold. If you inherited too much, you were greedy. If you smiled even once, someone might say you were glad he was gone. You might try to remarry, maybe for companionship, maybe to protect yourself. But that's risky too, because a woman with history is considered used goods. You're not a blushing virgin anymore. You've known sex, that makes you both less desirable and more dangerous. There's a long history of art and literature that paints widows as either tragic saints or cunning seductresses. Never something in between. Either you're a relic draped in black, weeping into your rosary, or you're a temptress, using your grief like bait. Either way, you're not trusted. And there's the looming risk of being left completely alone. No husband, no sons, no brothers, just you, aging in a world that doesn't care if you survive the winter. In some parts of the world, the rules for widows were harsher still. In medieval India, certain regions practiced sati, a ritual where a widow was expected to throw herself on her husband's funeral pyre. Voluntarily or not, the act was supposed to show ultimate devotion, but let's be honest, it was often coerced. Women were drugged, pressured, dragged, burned alive, and even outside such extremes, the social death of widowhood could be just as brutal. You're no longer invited to feasts. You're avoided at celebrations. People treat you like a bad omen. After all, death follows you. You learn to survive with what's left. You become sharp, quiet. You master the art of invisibility until you need to be seen. You hide your silver under floorboards. You keep your door locked at night. You barter favours with the baker and the priest and the widow next door who knows a thing or two about herbs. Some widows carve out new lives. They become midwives, teachers, caretakers. In rare cases, they even gain respect. In some medieval towns, widows were allowed to join trade guilds, run businesses, manage property. But even then, their success was seen as an exception, not a right, and always, men were waiting to take it away. There's a scholarly argument that widows had more freedom than married women in certain eras, and that's true, in the sense that no one was actively sleeping next to them, making demands. But that freedom came with a price: scrutiny, isolation, and the constant threat of being labelled a problem that needed solving. So here you are, alone at last, but not free. Your home is smaller, your world is quieter. You've buried the man who claimed your body for years, and now you sleep in a bed where no one touches you. And sometimes, in the dark, that feels like a blessing. But the rest of the time, it's just another reminder that no matter what stage of life you reach, maiden, mother, widow, you're never really left alone. They always find a new way to watch you. You're not born into a family, you're born into bondage. No name of your own, no land, no money. Just a body that someone else owns from your first breath to your last. You don't get to dream about your wedding dress or wonder who you'll fall in love with, because there will be no wedding, and love has nothing to do with what's coming. You're an enslaved woman, and that means your body isn't yours. It's a tool, a product, a possession that can be used, broken, sold, and still be expected to keep working. This is not marriage. This is not even forced marriage. This is ownership, and the rules here are different, worse, because there are no illusions about control. There's no pretense of rights. You don't need to be silenced because no one thinks you have the right to speak. You're told what to do, where to go, what to carry, when to sleep, and who to serve. And you do all of it with the quiet knowledge that at any moment someone might demand more. Not because they love you, not because you agreed, because they can. You could be 10 years old, not even past the age of childhood games, and already a man might reach for you, not as a future wife, but as property. Not behind closed doors, but in the open, because who's going to stop him? The laws aren't made to protect you, they're made to protect him. In some parts of the world, especially during centuries of institutional slavery, across ancient Rome, colonial America, the Islamic caliphates, the European empires, enslaved women were not only labourers, but expected to fulfill the S3x needs of their owners. That language, S3x needs, is a polite way to describe a system built on repeated systematic RP. And when it results in pregnancy, the baby becomes property too. You don't get to name the child. You don't get to keep them close. Your baby is born into bondage, a new investment for someone else's wealth. In the American South, white enslavers often forced themselves on enslaved black women, then sold their own children. That's how far the system went. Fathers turning their own offspring into cash. Mothers nursing babies who would one day be ripped from their arms and sold downriver. In the Ottoman Empire, female slaves were kept in harems, supposedly luxurious but still prisons. Some were elevated to favoured concubines, even bore sons who became sultans, but the power they gained came from their proximity to a man. It was never truly theirs. The threat of violence hung over everything. And in ancient Rome, female slaves could be ordered to sleep with guests as part of hospitality. Your body might be a dowry, a bribe, a punishment, a favour. You had no say, no agency. Your entire existence was someone else's decision. There's no word for consent here. You might not even have a language in common with the man using you. Your family is gone, sold, dead, lost in transit. The people around you don't see a woman. They see property with reproductive potential. And here's the brutal paradox. Sometimes your value increases because of that potential. You're praised for being fertile, for bearing strong children who grow up to be strong workers or soldiers or concubines themselves. Your pain becomes profit. Your trauma becomes legacy. Some enslaved women tried to resist in whatever ways they could. They used herbs to prevent pregnancy, when they could find them. They feigned illness. They taught their daughters how to run, how to hide, how to endure. They formed secret communities where they could speak freely, mourn openly, hold each other through the nights when their bodies betrayed them. And still, many were punished for the smallest resistance. Beaten for saying no, starved for crying too loudly, branded for trying to escape. Some slave codes even spelled it out clearly. Enslaved women had no legal grounds to accuse a white man, or any man in power, of S3x assault. Because how could you assault something you owned? And yet, the system still found ways to blame you. You were accused of seduction, of temptation, of provoking the master. Never mind that you were a child. Never mind that you wept and screamed and bled. The crime, somehow, was still yours. The trauma didn't end with the act. It lived in your body, in the way you flinched at footsteps, in the way your voice trembled, in the way you looked at your own child and saw not only your blood, but the blood of the man who took everything from you. There are stories, mostly passed down orally, of enslaved women who took control in the only way they could, by ending their pregnancies, or, heartbreakingly, ending the lives of their newborns. Not out of cruelty, but as a final act of mercy. A refusal to let their children grow up in chains. These acts were called monstrous by the people in power. But to the women, they were acts of defiance, of love in its fiercest form. Scholars still debate how much choice enslaved women had in different historical contexts. Some argue there were rare cases of consensual relationships. But what does consent even mean when one person has total control over the other's life? When saying no isn't an option? There's no room for nuance when survival is the only goal. And sometimes, even that slips out of reach. So you carry on because what else is there? You clean yourself up in the dark. You raise children who may not live to adulthood, or who may be taken from you. You lock your trauma so deep inside your body it becomes part of your bones. And all the while, the world outside keeps turning. Men get richer. Empires expand. Families grow, off the backs and wombs of women who were never seen as human in the first place. You were born into this. And no one ever asked you if you wanted to be. Your skin is different. Your accent too. Maybe your eyes. Maybe your customs. You were born into a land the Empire doesn't understand, and that means they believe they own it. And now, standing at the edge of your own village, or city, or coastline, or desert, you watch them arrive. Ships, horses, armor that shines too bright, flags you've never seen, languages that slice through yours like knives. They call it discovery. You know it's invasion. You, as a woman in a colonized land, are marked before they even learn your name, if they bother to learn it at all. Because your body isn't just something to be conquered, it's something to be redefined. Stripped of your meaning, rewritten through their lens. You're exotic now. You're wild. You're primitive. Or worse, you're available. They build their stories around you. You become symbols before you're even spoken to. If you're from Africa, they'll say your body is hypersexual, made for labour and pleasure alike. If you're indigenous, they'll say you're close to nature, submissive, barely civilized. If you're from the East, they'll say you're mysterious, seductive, waiting to be unveiled. You become the fantasy, not the fact. Colonial men write about your body in journals, poems, travel logs. You're catalogued like a specimen. The swell of your hips, the curve of your breasts, the way you dance, speak, pray. You're turned into art, but not the kind that uplifts, the kind that strips. And the danger in all of this, it gives them permission. You're already less than, a subject, not a citizen, a native, not a person. So what happens to your body doesn't count the same. In their eyes, you're lucky to be touched by them. You should be grateful. You should smile and pose and submit so they come into your village, your home, your life and take. Sometimes gently, often not, and always without question. There's a long gut-wrenching history of colonizers using sexual violence as a tool of domination. It wasn't just about desire, it was strategy. Humiliate the men by violating their women, mix the bloodlines, show who's in control. In the Americas, in Asia, in Africa, across continents, women were taken not just in bedrooms but in public. on ships, in fields, in barracks. Their bodies were used to cement power, to breed new classes, to serve both as servants and trophies. And then came the shame, because once they're done with you, they step back and point the finger. You're the immoral one, the seductress, the native girl who tempted the poor civilized man. Never mind that you said no, or couldn't speak the language, or were 12. They turn your body into a story, and the story always ends with them as the victim. And when children are born from these violations, you're left holding them in your arms, trying to explain where they fit in a world that doesn't want them. Half this, half that, fully hated. Sometimes the children are taken, sometimes they're left behind and treated as a scar. You love them, you mourn them, you're blamed for them. In French colonies they had a term for women like you, fille de couleur. In Spanish territories, mestiza. In English records they simply call you the girl. Rarely by name, never with dignity. Even in places where relationships with colonizers were framed as consensual, the power dynamic is impossible to ignore. You need protection, food, medicine, so you trade. Your body becomes currency. And when they tire of you, you disappear, and still they make you art. You're painted lounging half-naked in silk, your skin glowing, your expression blank. You're a harem girl, an odalisque, a muse. They carve you in stone, sketch you in charcoal, make you immortal, but never in your own voice. Here's a disturbing historical twist. European men in the 18th and 19th centuries would sometimes bring indigenous women back home, as wives, concubines, or curiosities. Sarah Baartman, a South African woman, was exhibited in freak shows across Europe for the shape of her body. After her death, her genitals were dissected and displayed in museums for over a century. Her name survived, but not her story. Colonialism didn't just steal land, it stole narratives. It stripped women of their cultures, then punished them for what was left. You try to hold on to your traditions, your language, your sense of self. You tattoo your skin. You sing the songs your grandmother taught you. You teach your daughters not to look men in the eye, not to walk alone, not to wear their traditional clothes anymore, because now even culture has become dangerous. Scholars still argue about the degree to which colonized women resisted, collaborated, or negotiated survival under empire. The truth, of course, is complicated. Some women found ways to leverage their positions. Others were crushed under the weight of erasure. But they all lived in the same reality. A world where their bodies were not just female, but foreign, and therefore always available for conquest. So you go to bed with silence wrapped around your body like a second skin. You braid your daughter's hair in the morning and tell her to keep her eyes low. You bury your rage, your grief, your pride. You watch the horizon for ships that keep coming. And you know that somewhere on a parchment desk in a city that has never smelled your soil, a man is writing about you, and getting everything wrong. You've heard the sermons since you were old enough to sit still. God is watching, and he's very, very interested in what you do with your body. Or more precisely, what you don't do. In this world, religion doesn't just guide morality, it owns your desire. And if you're a woman, your sexuality is either a threat to the divine order or a sin waiting to happen. The messages are everywhere, in the chapel's chill, in the scowls of robed men, in the stained glass saints whose eyes never meet yours. Desire, you're told, is a slippery path straight to damnation. If you feel it, you're weak. If you act on it, you're wicked. If you enjoy it, well, don't even think about enjoying it. That's the devil's work. And yet somehow the rules are mostly for you. Men can struggle with lust. They can confess, be forgiven, go back to it tomorrow. Boys will be boys, even in the eyes of God. But you're expected to be the gatekeeper of purity, a living chastity belt with no room for temptation, no hunger, no needs. And when a man stumbles, it's your fault. Your skirt was too short, your hair too loose, your laugh too loud. You made him look, you made him think, you made him fall. The burden of everyone else's morality falls squarely on your shoulders. In many religions, this control is baked into doctrine. The Bible speaks of Eve as the one who tempted Adam, the first sinner, the mother of all punishment. In Islam, modesty is a central principle, with many interpretations focusing intensely on the regulation of women's dress and movement. Hindu texts speak of chastity as a woman's highest virtue, and across them all, the common thread remains. Your virtue is your silence, your obedience, your denial of self. It's not just what you do that's policed, It's what you think. If you feel desire, you're expected to crush it. If you dream of touch, you're told to pray harder. You confess thoughts you don't fully understand to men who speak in riddles and judge with straight faces. You beg forgiveness for things your body did without your permission. And here's the cruel irony. Sometimes, religion is the only refuge you're offered. A girl with nowhere to go, she's encouraged to take vows, become a nun, marry Christ, live a life of devotion. Which sounds holy, even poetic, until you realize what it really means. No sex, no children, no ownership of your body ever again. You're not escaping control. You're swapping one master for another. And in some religions, the punishment for stepping outside the rules is brutal. You're shamed, exiled, sometimes even killed. Honor killings, public lashings, forced marriage to redeem your soul, not because you hurt someone, but because you dared to exist in a body that felt something.
Historical documents are littered with confessions extracted under pressure. Women sobbing before inquisitors, admitting to impure thoughts, blaming themselves for the sins of others. Girls locked in convents against their will. Widows burned alive on funeral pyres to prove their loyalty. Entire sects devoted to breaking women of their worldly temptations. And all the while, men quote scripture to justify it. Wives, submit to your husbands. Women should remain silent in the churches. She must be modest, pure, self-controlled. You memorize the verses before you can read them. You sew them into your clothing, whisper them as penance, teach them to your daughters like lullabies. Because to forget is to sin, and to sin is to suffer. And yet, deep inside, the body doesn't forget, even with the sermons, even with the shame. There's a pulse in you that won't go away, a craving for something more than this endless denial, a moment of closeness that isn't punishment, a touch that doesn't come with guilt. But you bury it, again and again. You're told that the ultimate woman is the Virgin Mother, pure yet reproductive, sacred yet untouched. It's an impossible standard that no real woman can meet, and yet you're expected to try. Be holy, but not proud. Be modest, but fertile. Be silent, but gracious. Be everything, but never too much. Even in death, the rules follow you. Your tombstone might praise your piety, your submission, your status as beloved wife, not your strength, not your fire, not your story. And the church, whichever one it is, writes itself as the author of your life. Your desires are a footnote. Your pleasure, nowhere to be found. Still, there were always women who carved out quiet spaces within faith. Mystics who wrote poetry about divine ecstasy, cloistered nuns who formed secret sisterhoods, wise women who wove religious rituals with folk knowledge to help those in need. These were acts of resistance wrapped in robes of obedience, subtle, clever, and dangerous. But for most, religion was not freedom, it was a leash. And that leash went everywhere with you, into your home, your marriage bed, your own mind. So you cross yourself before sleep, even on the nights you cry into your pillow, for reasons you can't name. You kneel and pray for the strength to stop wanting anything more than what you've been given. You confess your thoughts, again and again, to men who never have to explain theirs. Because here, in this world, a holy woman is a quiet woman. And you've been trained to believe that quiet is the same thing as good. You're sick, or something like it. Maybe your stomach's been off for weeks. Maybe your dreams are strange, or your skin burns for no reason. You feel something unsettled in your chest, and your neighbors say you're just melancholic, but your aunt gives you a strange look. Then she whispers, "You should see the healer." Not the doctor. He doesn't treat women like you unless it's an emergency. And not the priest. He'd just tell you to pray harder and confess more, so you find her. The woman with the garden behind her cottage, the one who smells like earth and knows more than she should. She grinds roots and crushes leaves, and she doesn't flinch when you say the thing you can't even admit to yourself. You haven't bled in over 2 months, and it's not your husband's. She doesn't judge you. She just reaches for a bundle of dried plants and starts mixing. She calls it a tea. You know it's something more. You're desperate enough not to ask too many questions. This is what passes for medicine in your world. Half knowledge, half superstition, all risk. Because formal medicine, the kind taught in universities and practiced by men in clean robes, doesn't care about you unless your body is tied to a man who matters. And even then, they're more interested in your womb than your pain. You've heard some of the advice. Don't bathe too often, it might stir your blood. Don't eat too much of this root or that fruit, it could inflame the humors. If you're barren, try lying beneath a sheep's skin at midnight while drinking boiled mare's milk. If you want a son, avoid cold foods and think noble thoughts during sex. It all sounds ridiculous until you remember that it's all you've got. Doctors write entire treatises about the female condition without ever speaking to a woman in pain. They debate among themselves whether the uterus moves like an animal, whether female pleasure is necessary for conception, whether a woman can conceive through her imagination alone. Your body is discussed like a map drawn by men who've never stepped foot on the land. And when you do get seen by a physician, rare, expensive, usually a last resort, you're a case study, not a patient. He asks more questions about your menstrual cycle than your fever. He mutters Latin, prescribes leeches, maybe offers mercury or crushed pearls. You try not to scream when the metal speculum enters you, cold, unwashed, barbaric. No anesthesia, no apology, no choice. Still, you keep seeking cures, because you're tired of the pain, the bleeding, the constant sense that your body is betraying you, and no one around you takes it seriously. If you're in pain during sex, you're told it's normal. If you faint from blood loss, they say you're too delicate. If you ask too many questions, they say you're hysterical. It's not that medicine doesn't exist, it's that it wasn't made for you. One historical horror. In some cultures, gynecological surgery was performed on enslaved women without anesthesia, under the belief that their pain tolerance was higher, or simply didn't matter. Men like J. Marion Sims, often called the father of modern gynecology, experimented on black women's bodies in the 19th century without their consent. Their suffering paved the way for modern tools that still carry the echo of screams no one acknowledged. Meanwhile, so-called cures for female problems range from harmless to lethal. You're given opium for cramps, vinegar douches for contraception, arsenic for acne. Want to avoid pregnancy? Here, drink this mixture of honey and crushed ants. Want to stop unwanted desire? Apply cold compresses to your thighs and pray. And sometimes, what you're really being treated for isn't physical at all. It's control. You're too loud, too sad, too angry, too sexual. So the treatment isn't a remedy, it's correction. You're given sedatives to calm you down, told to rest more, told to have more sex, told to have less sex, told you're sick because you're not fulfilling your role as a wife or mother. And if nothing else works, they might suggest bloodletting, or drilling a hole in your skull to let the madness escape. There's always a new theory, a new tool, a new punishment. Even childbirth, your most expected duty, is approached like a spectacle. In elite circles, doctors use it to test their new inventions: metal forceps, cervical dilators, tools of extraction. Women die because these men are practicing, learning. Your death is just a footnote in someone's lecture. And if you live, you're expected to be grateful, to praise the system that never learned how to listen to you. There's a fringe historical belief from ancient Greece that women's bodies were just inverted male bodies, that the womb was an inside-out penis, that female biology was a less perfect version of male design. Let that sink in. This thinking persisted for centuries, shaping everything from anatomy to morality. If men are the default, then women must be defective. And if women are defective, then our pain, our needs, our suffering, none of it really counts. Modern scholars have begun to reframe this history, looking for the women who practiced medicine in secret. The midwives, the herbalists, the folk healers. They existed. They learned through experience, passed knowledge in whispers, stitched wounds with trembling fingers, but they were often written out, or worse, written against. Because the official version of medicine, like everything else, was made by and for men. And you? You're a test subject, a problem, a patient who never gets better because she was never supposed to. So you drink the bitter tea, you lie in the dark, you pray that this time the pain will go away, that this time the cure won't kill you. You dream of a world where medicine sees you as something more than a mystery to solve. But for now, mystery is all they'll let you be. You fall in love. That's it. That's the whole scandal. You didn't plan it, didn't mean for it to happen, didn't go looking for trouble, but it finds you anyway, because feelings aren't exactly known for following rules. And unfortunately, the world you live in has a lot of rules, especially when it comes to who a woman is allowed to love. He's not your husband. Maybe you're not even married, but he's the wrong caste, the wrong religion, the wrong skin, the wrong name. Or maybe it's not a he at all. Maybe you love another woman. Or maybe you love someone your father hates, someone your community fears, someone who doesn't offer a bride price high enough to outweigh the gossip. And just like that, what should have been a private matter of the heart becomes a crime. You try to keep it quiet. You meet in the shadows, hands brushing as you pass in crowded streets, stolen moments beneath moonlight, writing names in the dust because you're not allowed to say them out loud. But the world watches women too closely. They always have. A cousin sees, a servant overhears, a neighbor starts to whisper, and then everything unravels. In some places, loving the wrong person is punished with marriage to someone else, a rushed ceremony. No joy, just chains wrapped in gold. In others, it's exile. You're disowned, sent away, erased from family records like you were never born. And in the worst cases, the punishment is death. Not his, yours. You hear the stories, even if people try not to say them too loudly. Girls stoned in the market square. Sisters smothered in their sleep. Lovers dragged from their homes at dawn. They call them honor killings, as if the murder of a woman restores some mythical family pride, as if your death scrubs the shame from their doorstep. And shame is the key word here. Not sin, not crime, shame. Because at the root of all this rage is the idea that your body, and everything you do with it, belongs to someone else. Your father, your husband, your village, your God. And if you use it outside of their control, you're the one who gets punished. In some historical texts, women are described as vessels of virtue. The implication is clear. If you spill even a drop of that virtue, you're ruined. Doesn't matter how or why. Doesn't matter if it was mutual, tender, private. Love in this world is only valid when it serves the social order. Here's a cruel little twist. Men who cross these boundaries might be punished, but they're rarely killed for it. A man caught with the wrong woman might lose his inheritance, might be scolded, might be sent away for a while. But women? Women pay with their lives, or if not that, with a living death, forced into silence, submission, and invisibility. And yet, love keeps happening. You're not the first woman to risk everything for a glimpse of something real. You won't be the last. There are poems carved into prison walls, letters hidden in hems, lovers' names murmured through locked doors. You survive on these scraps, these flashes of humanity in a world that wants you mechanized. Marry, birth, die, repeat. In ancient China, some women formed golden orchid sisterhoods, intimate, lifelong partnerships with other women, often in defiance of the male-dominated structure. In medieval Europe, love letters between nuns revealed deep emotional and sometimes erotic bonds that the church refused to acknowledge. And in India, legends of Radha and Krishna dance between devotion and forbidden love, offering at least a poetic whisper of resistance. But resistance is dangerous, always has been. You try to walk the line, honor your family, hide your heart, survive the day. But your face betrays you. Your joy is a giveaway. And one day, the punishment comes. Maybe it's your own family who turns on you. Maybe it's the law. Maybe it's the priest, or the neighbor, or the midwife who suddenly won't meet your eyes. 1 minute, you're in love. The next, you're standing trial. The charges vary. Adultery, immorality, witchcraft, disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace. But they all mean the same thing. You stepped outside your assigned box. You forgot your place. You loved without permission. There's a legal record from the 17th century Massachusetts where a woman was whipped in the town square for lying with a man not her husband. He received a fine. She received lashes. That's not a glitch in the system. It is the system, and it repeats century after century. Different names, same story. There's ongoing academic debate about whether these laws were more about preserving religious purity or social hierarchy. Scholars argue over which cultures were more permissive, where women had more room to make personal choices. But the trend is clear. Wherever power is threatened by uncontrolled female desire, that desire becomes criminal. You sit in the cell, or the hut, or the locked bedroom where they've hidden you. You think of his face, or hers, or theirs, and you wonder what the price of love is supposed to be. You did not kill. You did not steal. You simply followed a feeling that asked to be followed. And now everything is gone. If you're lucky, you're allowed to live. But not as yourself. You're rebranded, tamed, married off to someone who doesn't ask questions, watched until the end of your days. You learn to fake the blank look, the quiet nod, the unthinking yes. But part of you never comes back. Because the worst part isn't the punishment. It's knowing the love was real, and it was never allowed to matter. You pick up the scroll, the book, the painting, maybe by accident, maybe while cleaning, maybe tucked behind your father's desk, and what you find inside doesn't match anything you were ever told. It's full of bodies, curved, arching, tangled together. Some are men with women, some are men with men. Some are impossible to categorize. The art is beautiful, or it's crude, or it's so precise it makes your skin warm. But one thing is clear, it's not for you. This is erotica. And every page whispers the same message. Women are objects, not participants. You are to be watched, consumed, fantasized about, but never centered, never in control. It might be ancient Japanese shunga, lush woodblock prints of lovers, always with the man grinning and the woman coyly half-dressed, gazing just off to the side. Or medieval European manuscripts, where the margins hide obscene little sketches of monks and maids doing things the text never mentions. Or Greco-Roman pottery, where bodies are depicted mid-act with more attention paid to technique than to emotion. And it always goes one way. His pleasure is central. Hers is assumed. Or ignored. You're not supposed to see these. Your mother would snatch them away. Your brother would laugh and hide them in a chest. But now that you've glimpsed it, you can't unsee it. This is what they think sex is. Not communion, not connection, performance, for them, for men, about men. And yet, you feel something stir, something curious. Is that wrong? You were taught not to look, not to wonder, not to question, but here it is, proof that desire exists in pictures and poems and plays, that bodies can be sources of pleasure, not just suffering, that someone somewhere thought about this and wrote it down. The problem? You don't exist in these works, not really. Or if you do, you're painted with the same brush, soft, submissive, receptive. A canvas for his craving, never the artist, never the craving itself. In the 18th century, elite European men collected pornography the way they collected rare coins, hidden in drawers, exchanged in winks and nods. Some kept forbidden libraries, filled with French novels and Italian sketches that turned women into metaphors, into vessels, into mirrors for male lust. The few female characters who took control were usually punished in the end, murdered, mad, or married off to someone they didn't want. And if a woman dared to write erotica, scandal, danger, censorship, men like the Marquis de Sade wrote volumes of twisted fantasies, some of them violent, all of them steeped in power. Women like Anaïs Nin came centuries later, and even then were told to tone it down, sweeten the edges, make it poetic or be banned. You start to wonder, what would erotica look like if it were written for women? By women? Would the bodies be different? The rhythms? The endings? But you're not allowed to ask that. You're not even supposed to have a body, not one with wants, especially not messy wants. You've been told to aim higher, toward purity, modesty, holy detachment. The idea of you reading something sensual is laughable, or worse, threatening, because the truth is female desire terrifies them. If you want sex, you become uncontrollable. If you enjoy sex, you can't be trusted. And if you create art about sex, well, then you're a danger to civilization. That's what they tell themselves. That's why they exclude you. Even in cultures where erotica was widespread, like in ancient India with texts like the Kama Sutra, women were taught to serve their husband's pleasure first. There were instructions on seduction, on how to sound pleased, how to move your body correctly, but always with the assumption that he is the center of the act. You are the echo. And yet, women kept making things in secret. Hidden diaries, love poems buried under the safe, acceptable ones, paintings of their own bodies, sometimes twisted, sometimes serene, sometimes raw. Not for display, not for sale, just for expression. These pieces rarely survived, burned by fathers, lost in wars, dismissed by scholars as trivial. But once in a while, one slips through. A letter from a widow to her lover, a statue carved in her image, a song passed down from mother to daughter that speaks of something deeper than duty. There's a scholarly tug of war over whether women in ancient societies had access to erotica at all, or if it was a genre built by and for men alone. Some say women were the primary readers of romantic fiction in 19th century Europe, often hiding the racier ones under their pillows. Others argue that what was available to them wasn't erotica so much as fantasy, the sanitized version, where desire is resolved only through marriage, and even then, without any actual touching on the page. What's missing? Honesty, exploration, permission. You try to create your own, quietly. Maybe it's just in your head. Maybe it's a dream you don't share. But it feels like rebellion. You imagine a world where your body isn't just something that happens to you, but something you feel from within. You imagine what you would write, if anyone let you, what you would draw, what you would ask for. And it burns, not in shame, but in potential. But for now, you close the book, you fold the sketch, you wipe away the evidence and return to your daily role, obedient, modest, uncurious. You watch the men laugh in corners, passing around pictures and poems, none of which contain a woman who looks like you. And you pretend you don't care. But deep down, you know the truth. The absence is a choice. They don't want you here, because once you start creating your own stories, the old ones stop working. And the last thing they want is for you to write your own ending. It's not written down, not carved into any official law, but you know it just the same. There are no rules here, only customs. And customs are slippery things, rigid when used against you, soft and flexible when protecting someone else. Especially men, especially power, especially the people who get to decide what happens to women like you when things go wrong. You live under a system built on traditions that pretend to be justice. There are no real laws protecting your body, your choice, your silence, or your scream. There are just expectations. And if you break them, if you say no, if you cry foul, if you step out of line, everyone acts like they're confused, like they don't know what to do with you. As if there are no guidelines for your safety, only punishments for your defiance. If a man forces himself on you, who do you tell? The priest? He might ask what you were wearing. The village elder? He'll likely say you should have been home. Your family? Maybe they'll believe you, but just as often, they'll blame you for bringing shame, for putting yourself in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in the wrong body. So you learn quickly, don't speak, don't look, don't risk. Because when there are no laws protecting you, the only thing standing between you and harm is the mood of the man who wants something. And how many people are willing to look the other way? Take marriage, for example. In theory, it's sacred. In practice, it's a transaction. Once you're married, the violence that might have been called a crime before, if barely, is now considered normal. His rights over your body are assumed. You don't get to say no. You don't get to report him. And even if you do, the community will likely say, that's his wife, that's his business. You stop being a person and become a permission slip. If you are assaulted by someone outside of marriage, the reaction is just as chilling. Some cultures offer marry your rapist laws, ancient and modern alike, where a man can avoid punishment if he agrees to marry the woman he harmed. Because what matters most, in their eyes, is not justice. It's restoring your so-called value. As if your worth can be salvaged by binding you forever to the one who violated you. You don't get to say, no, not to the act, not to the marriage, not to the future they've chosen for you. This isn't an exaggeration. In ancient Hebrew law, in parts of the Middle East, and even in 20th century European countries, marriage could override rape. The act was erased with a ring, and you were expected to start cooking and bearing children like nothing happened. You learn quickly that the people writing the rules never imagined a woman like you needing protection. And if you think you'll find salvation in the courts, or whatever passes for them, you might be disappointed. Evidence? They want a witness. Consent? They say your silence was approval. Injuries? They ask if you were maybe just rough in bed. If you're a poor woman accusing a rich man, forget it. If you're enslaved accusing a free man, you may be punished instead. If he's powerful and you're invisible, the game is rigged before it even begins. Meanwhile, men have their own quiet codes. Boys will be boys. He made a mistake. She was asking for it. He's a good man, really. They defend each other with nods and shrugs and old sayings about temptation and nature and male weakness. And all of it? It rests on the assumption that your body is a problem that needs to be managed, not a person who deserves protection. And still, they dare to ask why you don't come forward. Because when you do, it's not justice waiting at the other end. It's interrogation, ridicule, sometimes even revenge. In some parts of the world, there are purity tests, medieval and modern alike, a finger inserted, a cloth examined, a test of your hymen's supposed integrity, as if a membrane can prove trauma, as if science has anything to do with shame. And the worst part? These so-called customs don't stay in the past. They carry forward like ghosts. In many places, marital rape is still legal. In others, victims are still forced to marry their abusers. In too many more, legal systems built on patriarchal interpretations of tradition continue to deny women the basic right to safety. Scholars still debate whether these customs were meant to maintain order, protect families, or simply uphold male dominance. Spoiler, it's the last one. But they use religion, culture, and history as their shields, pretending their brutality is just part of how things have always been. And yet, women have always resisted. Quietly sometimes, boldly when they can. By running away, by forming hidden communities, by telling their stories in hushed voices to daughters, friends, healers. Not all justice comes from courts. Sometimes it comes from firelight and whispered warnings, from a sister who hides you, from a mother who teaches you which paths are safe at night, from a friend who knows which herbs to carry in your skirt. Because when the laws aren't made for you, you have to make your own. So you keep your head down in public and speak the truth only where it's safe. You know how the system works now, how it pretends to be fair while grinding you down in its gears. And still, you survive. You learn to hide your strength. You learn to mask your fear. You learn the shape of silence and how to sharpen it into something that might protect the next girl. Because even when the law is just a costume, you still walk through this world knowing that survival itself is resistance. You don't plan to become a rebel. You don't wake up one morning deciding to challenge centuries of control, tradition, and fear. No, it usually starts smaller than that. Just one moment, one choice, one refusal. Maybe you say no when you're supposed to say yes. Maybe you speak when silence is safer. Maybe you don't bow low enough. Maybe you let your daughter wear her hair loose, or teach her to read, or tell her that her body is hers. It doesn't take much to be dangerous when you're a woman. The rebellion of women before modern times was rarely loud. No swords, no manifestos. Most of it happened in the quiet. A look exchanged, a story passed down, a door left unlocked. You become an expert in small resistance. Not because you're timid, but because you're brilliant. You've learned to move beneath notice, to twist the rules without snapping them, to survive without surrendering. In your world, that makes you a threat. Maybe you're the midwife who slips herbs into the tea of a girl who's already had too many children. You never call it what it is, but you both understand. Maybe you're the wife who pretends to faint during a husband's advances, buying yourself one quiet night of rest. Or maybe you're the servant who teaches the master's daughter how to write her name when no one's looking. None of it seems revolutionary, and yet it is, because every act says, "I am not entirely yours." They try to make you feel alone, as if no other woman has ever doubted, disobeyed, or desired. But if you listen closely, the echoes are everywhere. Letters written in code, patterns in embroidery that tell a story no man will read. Recipes passed through generations with secret instructions tucked between the lines. Even laughter can be resistance, even joy. In ancient Rome, women formed their own religious festivals where men were not allowed. These weren't just social events, they were spaces to breathe, to speak, to grieve, to scheme. In medieval Europe, some women disguised themselves as men to escape convents or marriages. In Mughal India, courtesans used their education and influence to become poets, musicians, even advisors to kings. In Africa, enslaved women braided maps into each other's hair. None of these things show up in the official histories, because official history isn't written by people like you. It's written by the ones who want to forget that women ever pushed back. And sometimes, the resistance is loud. Joan of Arc, burned at the stake for wearing armor and hearing voices. Hypatia, murdered by a mob for teaching mathematics. Women accused of witchcraft not because they cast spells, but because they refused to conform, or owned land, or lived alone. The moment you step outside the lines, you're labeled, not as brave, not as smart, but as dangerous, troublemaker, harlot, witch, madwoman. You carry those labels the rest of your life, whether or not they were true. And yet, you carry them. You keep going. There's something radical in continuing to live your life on your own terms, even if those terms are limited. Maybe you never run away, but you raise a daughter who learns how to walk a little taller. Maybe you never publish your ideas, but you pass them through stories, shaping minds for generations. Maybe you never find freedom, but you leave the door cracked open for someone who might. Some scholars argue that women weren't resisting at all, that they simply endured, that they had no space to rebel. But endurance is resistance when the world wants you crushed. Breathing is defiance when they expect you to disappear. You learn to code your rebellion in politeness. You nod while thinking otherwise. You flatter, then redirect. You wear the veil while plotting freedom beneath it. You perform obedience like a mask, and underneath, you build a world they can't touch. Sometimes you even work from within. There are queens and empresses who use their power carefully, reshaping laws to protect the women under them. There are mystics who used religion to carve out space for female voices. There are philosophers who wrote under male pseudonyms just to be heard. They weren't perfect, no one is, but they made cracks in the system, and cracks are how light gets through. You begin to see the pattern. One woman survives by shrinking, another by shouting. One hides in books, another in battle. Some resist by teaching, some by escaping, some by simply staying alive. It's not always dramatic, but it always matters. You don't need to be remembered to have made a difference. You don't need your name in a book to have changed a life. Every time you helped someone stand when they were expected to kneel, you rewrote the rules. Even if no one saw it, but the person you saved. So maybe you're not a hero in the way history defines it. No statues, no titles, just footprints in the dust that another girl might follow, and that's enough. Because maybe one day, she'll have more than just cracks. Maybe she'll have a door. Maybe she'll walk through it. Maybe she'll turn around and find the woman who first showed her how. You. And now somehow you've made it to the end. Or at least close enough to see it from here. You've walked through every stage this world has offered you, as girl, wife, mother, widow, worker, property, problem. Maybe you've lived long enough to become invisible. Or maybe your survival has made you visible in the wrong ways. Too loud, too opinionated, too free for their comfort. But here you are, still standing. You're older now. The years have carved themselves into your skin. You don't bleed anymore. You don't bend as easily. The things that once terrified you, the shame, the whispers, the punishments, don't feel quite as sharp anymore. Maybe it's numbness, maybe it's wisdom, maybe it's just time. But make no mistake, even now, they're still watching. Old women are tolerated, sometimes even respected, but they're never entirely trusted. Especially not ones like you, with eyes that see too much and a mouth that forgets to stay shut. You've lived long enough to know the lies, and that makes you dangerous. You've stopped pretending you believe what you don't. You've seen the cost of silence, and you've grown tired of paying it. In some places, they call you crone. In others, wise woman. But the line between reverence and ridicule is thin. One wrong word, and you become the village hag, the bitter mother-in-law, the witch who lives alone. You're no longer sexual, which makes you, ironically, safer, and yet also more threatening. Because if you no longer serve desire, they wonder what purpose you could possibly have left. What's a woman after all, if not a vessel? But you know better, you always have. You remember every face you've buried, every baby that didn't make it, every time you bit your tongue to keep the peace, every girl you tried to protect, every moment you wanted to scream but smiled instead. Your history lives in your bones. Your memory is its own form of power. And sometimes, people come to you, quietly, carefully, the younger ones, the ones with questions no one else will answer. They ask you what to do when the bleeding won't stop, when the husband won't listen, when the touch doesn't feel right, when the world demands too much and offers too little. And you don't pretend to have all the answers, but you tell the truth, because someone should. You've become the archive, the oral record, the living page. And sometimes, when no one's looking, you let yourself remember what your own life might have been if the rules had been different. If your first kiss hadn't come with consequences. If childbirth hadn't felt like gambling with your life. If sex had been something you could choose or enjoy or refuse. You try not to dwell, but still, the what-ifs find you. Maybe you let yourself write things down now. Not for them, for you. Maybe you scribble your story on scraps of cloth or press it into the earth with a stick. Maybe you whisper it to your granddaughter while brushing her hair in a language that's almost gone. Maybe she laughs, not fully understanding. Maybe one day she will. There's a strange, quiet freedom in old age. You no longer care what they think of your hands, your hair, your voice. You stopped trying to be pleasing a long time ago. That part of your life is finished. The part where you were expected to smile through pain, to thank them for your suffering, to pretend everything was fine. Now, you say what needs saying. And yet, freedom is still a myth for most. You watch the next generation take their place on the same old carousel. Marriage, birth, service, shame. You see the same patterns repeating, the old stories in new clothes. You wonder if anything has truly changed. You wonder if all your endurance meant anything at all. But then, you remember something important. You're still here. And that alone is radical. In many historical records, women simply disappear after a certain age. Vanish from texts, from art, from law. Unless they were saints or sinners, they were ignored. No one cared to write about what an old woman thought, or wanted, or knew. But here you are, existing in the space they tried to erase. Your breath is a rejection of their silence. There are scholars now, digging through the fragments, trying to find the voices that were buried, reconstructing recipes that doubled as remedies, reading between the lines of male-authored texts to glimpse the women they forgot to name. Your story is finally being pieced together, not always kindly, not always fully, but enough to prove you were never invisible after all. And maybe that's the final truth in all of this, that you were always more than what they allowed you to be, that you've always been more than wife, or mother, or victim, or vessel, that your joy, your rage, your hunger, your pain, they mattered, even if no one wrote them down. But now we're writing them down, not to pity you, not to romanticize your suffering, but to witness it, to say you existed, you survived, you resisted, and you mattered, you still do. So now, as we reach the end of this long, heavy road, you settle back into your pillow. The room a little quieter than before. Maybe your thoughts a little louder. You've just walked through centuries of truth most people would rather not see. And still, somehow, you're here, breathing, thinking, feeling, remembering women who were never given the space to tell their stories out loud. You've carried their burdens for a while tonight, just long enough to honor them, just long enough to see what they saw, what they endured anyway. You don't have to hold on to all of it. Not tonight. Let it slip from your shoulders like a shawl. It'll still be there tomorrow if you want to pick it up again. But for now, rest. Because even the fiercest minds deserve peace. Even the most wide-open eyes deserve sleep. You're not powerless, and you never were. That's the quiet truth history doesn't always admit. You've got awareness now, a sharper kind of empathy, and maybe a few more questions than you had before. That's a good thing. The best kind of learning always leaves you a little unsettled, a little awake. So close your eyes. Let the noise of the world fade for a bit. You've earned your rest. And if you find yourself dreaming of distant centuries, of cold stone corridors or fire-lit rooms, of women whose names were never carved into the walls, remember, they weren't ghosts. They were real, and you carried them with you tonight. That matters. Sweet dreams.